I stepped onto the cracked pavement just as the sun was folding itself behind the distant rooftops. The warehouse loomed ahead, massive and hollow, like a forgotten skeleton draped in rust and peeling paint. I could feel it watching me even before I reached the main doors. The air smelled of damp concrete and old oil, a mix that made my chest tighten without warning. A cold wind rattled the broken windows, carrying the faint sound of metal creaking somewhere deep inside. It was subtle, almost polite, but it made me pause. I pushed the door open with a groan that seemed louder than it should have been. Inside, the warehouse swallowed the evening light immediately. Shadows pooled in corners, draping over stacks of crates and abandoned equipment. The floor was littered with splintered wood and discarded tools, some still slick with what looked like grease, others brittle with rust. My boots echoed, loud against the cavernous emptiness, and for a moment I considered whether anyone had ever walked these halls again, or if someone or something was still here. The air shifted as I moved further in, a faint draft brushing against my neck. It wasn't cold in the usual sense. It was the kind that tickles the spine, that whispers that the space around you is not quite empty. I stopped to listen. Somewhere far ahead, a sheet of metal trembled. Maybe a loose panel, I told myself, trying to steady my heartbeat. But the sound repeated, slow, deliberate. Tap, 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 like someone or something was counting steps in time with mine. I walked along a row of crates, running a finger along the dust-coated surfaces. Some of them were open, revealing machinery parts that seemed to belong to a bygone era, gears and rods rusting in silence. One crate had a pile of broken tools stacked neatly, almost ceremoniously, as if whoever left them behind had wanted to mark their presence. I crouched to inspect them, the smell of old iron rising into my nostrils, and noticed faint scratches on the floor leading toward a darker hallway. I followed them cautiously, each step stirring up a fine cloud of dust that hung like smoke. The deeper I went, the more the warehouse seemed alive in subtle ways. A beam overhead shifted with a slow creak. My own footsteps echoed back at me, but sometimes I swore they weren't quite mine. They lagged, hesitant, as though something was trying to follow at a distance. I paused, holding my breath, my pulse a low thrum in my ears. The sound stopped. The emptiness pressed around me, and I realized how utterly alone I was, or how utterly alone I wanted to be. I reached a corridor where the floorboards were more worn, and the ceiling sagged as if holding its breath. Faint scratches ran along the walls, too high to have been made by anyone crouching or crawling. I traced them with my eyes, imagining what might have caused them, fingers dragging, claws perhaps. My stomach twisted. The drafts here were sharper, swirling around my ankles like tiny fingers brushing past. Each gust seemed purposeful, nudging me forward. A loose window pane shuddered, rattling against the frame. The sound startled me, and I flinched, stepping back into a pool of shadow. It wasn't a sound one would notice from outside. It was intimate, meant only for those who dared to enter. I told myself it was just the wind. The warehouse had been abandoned for decades, nothing more. Yet as I moved on, a faint outline caught my eye, a long shadow stretching across the far wall. It wasn't mine, or at least not exactly. I froze, staring, but it dissolved into the darkness when I blinked. I tried to focus on the details around me. Rusted pipes crawled along the walls like veins. An old staircase led to a second level, half collapsed and coated in thick dust. The railing was brittle, warped, and yet it seemed to hum with a low resonance as though straining under some unseen weight. I ran my hand over it lightly. It vibrated ever so slightly, a subtle thrum that set my teeth on edge. I stepped back, unwilling to climb just yet. The air smelled stronger here, muskier, like something had been left to rot for years. I passed a row of metal shelving, empty except for a few tattered cardboard boxes. One of them toppled as I brushed past, spilling contents. Faded photographs, yellowed papers, a child's shoe. My stomach clenched at the sight. Who had left these things behind? Who had once moved through these same hallways, leaving traces that time could not completely erase? I heard it then, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper curling around the rafters. I stopped mid-step, head tilting, straining to catch the words. There was nothing, only the faint echo of the wind, yet I knew I hadn't imagined it. My breath quickened. I could feel my back hair rising. It was the sort of sound that lodges itself in the corners of your mind, lingering even when you want it to disappear. I continued, careful now, deliberately slow, as though the more I moved, the more I invited attention. My flashlight cut through the shadows, revealing heaps of abandoned machinery, engines, conveyor belts, and parts of tools I didn't recognize. Each object seemed placed with intention, yet abandoned without closure. I traced the outlines of a rusted engine with my fingers, feeling the jagged edges bite lightly. A hollow sound echoed from somewhere deep within the warehouse, a rhythmic tapping that wasn't synchronized with my steps. Tap, tap, tap. I followed it, curiosity pushing me forward despite the knot in my stomach. The corridor ended in a large open space where sunlight leaked in through the broken roof panels. Dust motes floated lazily, catching the light in brief, ghostly glimmers. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it began. I exhaled sharply, relief washing over me, but only for a moment. Something about the stillness felt deliberate, almost waiting. I scanned the area. Empty crates, collapsed scaffolding, and the faint outline of a door partially hidden behind a stack of metal sheets. The door drew me in inexplicably. I approached it, brushing aside the sheets. It was unremarkable solid wood with a corroded handle. I turned it slowly. The hinges groaned long and low like a warning. Inside, darkness swallowed the small room, the corners stretching further than they should. The smell hit me first, damp earth mixed with faint decay. I stepped inside, the floor creaking under me. My eyes adjusted slowly. The walls were bare, but the floor was marked. Scratches, smudges, and a single dark stain that I couldn't identify. I swallowed hard, my curiosity gnawing at me. What had happened here? The warehouse had been abandoned, yes, but nothing about this place felt empty. It felt paused, waiting for something, or someone. My flashlight flickered slightly, and I realized I wasn't sure which shadows belonged to the structure and which belonged to something else. I left the room reluctantly, feeling the warehouse breathe around me as I stepped back into the main hall. The tapping resumed, this time from a corner I had already passed, faint but insistent. My pulse jumped. I moved faster now, not running, just deliberately tracing my steps back toward the main exit. Every sound seemed magnified. The crunch of debris beneath my feet, the sigh of the wind through broken panels, a distant metallic groan. Outside, the sunlight had disappeared entirely, leaving a dim twilight that pressed against the building's walls. I paused, looking back at the warehouse. It was silent again, too silent. Yet something lingered in the corners of my vision, a sense of being followed, measured, watched. I knew I hadn't imagined the tapping or the whispers, not entirely. I stepped back onto the pavement, the cool evening air a relief against my flushed skin. But even as I moved away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the warehouse had shifted slightly, as though it had changed while I was inside. Something waited within, patient and still. I didn't know what. I didn't know why. All I knew was that it wasn't finished with me yet. And somehow I had the feeling I'd be drawn back, whether I wanted to go or not. I didn't want to go further, but something drew me deeper into the warehouse. It wasn't curiosity exactly, more like a pull I couldn't name, tugging at the edges of my thoughts. The hallway I followed led to a part of the building that smelled of rust and mildew, the kind of decay that sits in your lungs and refuses to leave. Shadows pooled around the corners, shifting just slightly whenever I tried to focus. Boxes, stacks of them lined the walls, tall and uneven. Most were old, collapsing under their own weight and covered in a thick layer of dust that had settled like snow over decades. But some didn't belong. They looked newer, less decayed, placed too deliberately among the ruin. I ran my hand along one, feeling its smooth edges beneath the grime. It moved. Or at least it felt like it did. I stepped back. Heart tightening, telling myself it was my imagination. Still, the sensation lingered, like the room itself was breathing around me. I moved cautiously between the rows, keeping my flashlight low to avoid catching reflections in the dark corners. The beam skimmed across jagged shapes and scattered debris, each flicker revealing more questions than answers. A crate leaned unnaturally against another as though it had been shifted recently. I crouched to inspect the ground. Faint marks pressed into the dust, footprints, small and uneven, leading deeper into the maze. Someone had been here, or something. My mind clung to that thought and refused to release it. The air changed subtly, becoming heavier, almost viscous. A draft whispered past my neck, warm in a way that didn't make sense for an abandoned building. I froze. Every instinct told me to leave, but every nerve in my body insisted I go forward. I couldn't see anything yet, but the sense of eyes on me was undeniable. The feeling crawled under my skin, a light pressure at the back of my skull, and I realized I wasn't alone. Something shifted in the shadows ahead. My flashlight flicked toward it, catching the edge of a box moving just slightly. I exhaled sharply, telling myself it was nothing. A rat maybe, or the wind. But the movement had a rhythm, deliberate and slow, as if whatever had shifted had weight, awareness. I stepped closer, each footfall deliberate, careful. The sound of my boots seemed magnified, echoing through the cavernous space, but I couldn't hear anything else. I paused, listening, and then I noticed the silence wasn't empty. There was a subtle tension to it, like a held breath in the corners of the room. My flashlight danced across a line of crates, and one of the boxes had been toppled over. Its contents were spilling, old photographs, torn letters, a small, chipped toy. I knelt to inspect them, the faint rustle of paper sounding deafening in the stillness. The photographs were black and white, faces blurred by age, but their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. I picked up one carefully, brushing the dust off. The image was of a warehouse interior, eerily similar to the one I was in, though dated decades earlier. In the corner of the photo, a shadow lingered, faint but unmistakable. I lowered it, trying to convince myself it was just light catching the paper. But as I glanced around the crates again, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. My pulse rose, subtle tremors running through my hands. Something was there, waiting. I continued down the aisle, now hyper-aware of every detail. Boxes that had been stacked neatly now leaned slightly, corners misaligned. Tools I had passed before were scattered differently, as if someone had handled them when I wasn't looking. A faint sound scraped across the concrete, soft, deliberate, almost like fingernails brushing metal. I froze, straining to catch more, but it vanished before I could locate it. The sense of observation grew heavier. Shadows that had been still moments ago now seemed to quiver, stretching along the walls and floor. I turned slowly, flashlight scanning every corner, every stack of crates. Nothing moved. Nothing visible anyway. And yet the instinct at the base of my skull screamed that I wasn't alone. I felt a presence lingering just beyond the reach of the light, patient, silent, and keenly aware of me. I pressed forward, curiosity overriding fear. My hands brushed against a crate and a faint vibration ran through it. Something inside it shifted, small but undeniable. I jumped back, heart hammering. The warehouse seemed to exhale around me, a slow, deliberate sigh that carried with it a weight I couldn't identify. My breath caught in my throat. Was it the building settling, or something else entirely? The aisle opened into a wider space, crates forming a labyrinth around me. The light from my flashlight cut narrow beams, leaving the rest of the room in darkness. I could hear the faint scraping again, this time closer, and my stomach knotted. I turned slowly, scanning the shadows. Nothing. And yet I knew something was following, keeping pace just beyond the edge of my perception. I crouched beside a toppled crate, inspecting its contents. Another photograph, older this time, faded and curling at the edges. A child's hand barely visible in the corner, pointing or reaching. I shivered, setting it down carefully. The silence that followed was heavier, almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of old beams high above. I moved deeper, following a path between the stacks that seemed vaguely familiar, though I knew I hadn't been here before. Footsteps echoed faintly behind me, my own, or someone else. I stopped abruptly, pressing my back against a crate, straining to hear. Nothing. The only sound was my shallow breathing, quick now despite my attempts to calm myself. A small pile of boxes to my right shifted subtly. I froze again, every nerve screaming. My flashlight hovered over them, trembling in my grip. They toppled slightly more, revealing a dark corner I hadn't noticed before. Something inside that corner seemed wrong, still. silent, waiting. The air was thicker here and I could smell a faint metallic scent, sharp and unfamiliar. I stepped closer, hesitant, and the sound of scraping returned, softer this time, almost like it was testing me. My hand hovered over a box, the vibration pulsing faintly against my palm. I recoiled instinctively, heart racing, but I couldn't look away. The shadows seemed to shift as I watched, forming shapes that my mind wanted desperately to dismiss, yet couldn't. I forced myself to move forward, pushing past the boxes. The aisle narrowed again and my flashlight flickered. A soft tap echoed somewhere to my left. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The pattern was deliberate, almost mocking. I swung the light toward it. Empty space. My pulse spiked. Whatever was here was not willing to show itself completely, not yet. I took another step, scanning every shadow. The crates seemed to lean toward me subtly, impossibly, as if the air around them had weight. A box tipped slightly when I brushed past, spilling more papers and photographs onto the dusty floor. I knelt, picking one up. A handwritten note, edges frayed, faded ink. "Don't look behind you." My stomach lurched, the words echoing in my mind louder than they should have. I froze, light shaking in my grip, ears straining. Silence. I told myself it was a joke, or a prank left decades ago. But the note felt urgent, almost alive. My pulse thrummed in my ears. Something had left that message, or something had wanted me to find it. I swallowed hard and pressed forward, curiosity outweighing reason. The aisle opened into another section, wider this time, crates scattered as if a storm had passed. Shadows pooled in every corner, some shifting imperceptibly. A faint draft brushed against my neck, carrying a whisper I couldn't catch, words that didn't form. I stepped carefully, listening. The warehouse seemed to breathe around me, alive in a way that defied explanation. I stopped at the center of the room. Boxes leaned at impossible angles, tools scattered as if dropped mid-use. The scraping returned, soft but deliberate, from a corner I hadn't noticed. I froze. My flashlight's beam quivered, catching the faint glimmer of something moving just at the edge. I stepped back. Nothing. Yet the sense of eyes pressing from the shadows didn't fade. I moved toward the far wall, boxes forming a narrow corridor. Each step felt heavier than the last. The light revealed faint marks on the floor, small scratches, dragging marks, subtle depressions that hadn't been there moments before. I followed them instinctively. Each mark seemed to lead deeper, and with it, the sense of being watched intensified. A box toppled suddenly, startling me, and I caught a glimpse of a shape in the corner of my vision. A dark silhouette, fleeting, gone before I could focus. My breath hitched. The warehouse seemed to sigh again, deliberately, knowingly. The shadows leaned in closer, and the faint metallic scent grew stronger. I was not imagining any of this. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm myself. There was something here, patient, lingering. Something that had watched me move through the crates, shifted the stacks subtly, left messages in faded ink. I didn't know what it wanted or why it remained hidden. But I knew one thing: I wasn't alone. And whatever had left those shadows among the boxes was aware of me, watching, waiting. I turned toward the exit for a brief moment, but the path I had come through no longer looked familiar. Crates had shifted again. Shadows pooled differently, corridors seemed longer. My pulse quickened. The warehouse had changed while I wasn't looking, and I realized with a cold certainty that this part of the building was no longer just empty space. It was alive in ways I couldn't yet understand. The moment I stepped into the narrower hallway beyond the crates, the air shifted. It was heavier here, the kind of stillness that presses against your chest and makes your lungs work harder without reason. My flashlight illuminated peeling paint and warped floorboards, but it wasn't the decay that unsettled me. It was the sound. Faint, almost imperceptible whispers curling through the space, brushing against the corners of my mind. I froze mid-step, heart pounding. Whispers don't belong in empty warehouses. They're a human sound, intimate, alive. I tilted my head, straining to make out words, but they didn't form anything coherent, just soft, curling syllables that tickled the back of my skull. My pulse sped. Was it my imagination? Maybe. The warehouse had a way of making you doubt your senses. I took a cautious step forward and the whispers seemed to retreat just out of reach, teasing me. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Shadows pooled along the walls, thick and heavy, curling around rusted pipes and broken crates. My flashlight beam trembled as I advanced. The whispers returned, shifting positions, weaving between me and the walls, following me with subtle insistence. I stopped, closed my eyes for a moment, trying to convince myself it was the wind, a trick of the acoustics. But the whispering didn't stop. If anything, it grew more deliberate, more conscious. I ran my fingers along a wall, the paint flacking under my touch, and tried to anchor myself to the physical world. Floorboards groaned, a slow, uneven rhythm beneath my boots, and I realized I could no longer tell which sound was mine and which belonged to whatever was here. My stomach twisted, the sense of being watched intensifying. I wanted to turn back, but something compelled me to move forward, drawn by curiosity I both feared and needed to satisfy. A doorway appeared, barely visible in the dim light, the frame warped and blackened by age. I approached it slowly, the whispers now circling me from multiple directions, faintly overlapping. I paused at the threshold. The room beyond was darker than the hallway, shadows pooling so thickly they swallowed the beam of my flashlight. The whispers grew louder here, pressing against the walls, echoing in corners I couldn't see. They were almost voices, children perhaps, adults, or something in between, but each sound seemed to end just as comprehension began. I stepped inside. The air smelled of damp wood, mildew, and something metallic beneath it. My flashlight swept over the room, stacks of crates, rusted machinery, scattered papers. It was a storage room at first glance, yet something felt off. Objects seemed slightly out of place, as if someone or something had been here very recently, despite the dust that coated everything. I knelt to inspect a pile of papers. They were old, yellowed with age, scribbled notes that made no sense at first glance. Yet the penmanship was deliberate, almost urgent, and the whispers seemed to pulse in rhythm with my reading. A soft creak made me snap my head up. Something shifted in the shadows near the far wall. My heart skipped a beat. I swung the flashlight toward it, empty. And yet the room felt alive, vibrating subtly, pressing against me with invisible weight. The whispers became a chorus, layered and textured, rising and falling like a tide. I could make out fragments, words, syllables, but they made no sense. They were both familiar and alien, like memories you almost recall but can't fully grasp. I moved cautiously between the crates, each step careful. A small box tipped over under my hand. Inside were old photographs, faces blurred with time. One showed a man standing in a hallway that looked eerily like this one, though decades older. His eyes were wide, almost panicked, and the shadows around him seemed unnaturally thick, like they were reaching. I set the photo down, feeling a shiver crawl along my spine. My flashlight flickered slightly, and the whispers seemed to grow sharper, more insistent. I stepped back, scanning the room. The stacks of crates formed a labyrinth now, the layout subtly altered from what I remembered entering. Whispers circled me, moving faster, teasing. I felt an inexplicable pressure at the back of my skull, as if unseen hands were pushing, nudging, guiding me deeper. I shook my head, trying to clear the tension, but the sensation didn't fade. The air itself seemed to thrum with attention. I pressed forward. A crate had shifted again, revealing a small doorway in the far corner, too low for an adult to walk through comfortably. I crouched, peering inside. The space beyond was dark, impossibly narrow, the faint glimmer of light catching in places I couldn't name. The whispers flowed from there, more distinct now, forming shapes that hovered just at the edge of comprehension. I swallowed hard, the urge to retreat battling against the need to understand. A faint metallic scent tickled my nose, sharp and almost sweet. I stepped closer, the whispers growing louder, rhythmic now, almost synchronized with my heartbeat. My flashlight illuminated a small figure crouched among the crates, empty, featureless, almost a shadow, but it shifted slightly as I watched. I blinked. It was gone, yet the pressure of being observed didn't fade. Whatever it was, it hadn't left. I moved through the narrow corridor between crates, the floorboards groaning beneath me. The whispers followed, a soft undulating hum that twisted around the edges of my consciousness. My hand brushed against a crate and I felt the vibration of movement beneath my fingers. Something shifted inside, slow and deliberate. I jumped slightly, blinking rapidly. The room was empty, yet the energy lingered, tangible and oppressive. I rounded a corner and froze. More photographs lay scattered on the floor. I picked one up. The image showed a hallway filled with boxes, shadows pooling in ways I knew weren't natural. A child's hand pressed against the lens, pale and blurred as if reaching through time. I felt my chest tighten. The whispers became clearer, almost words now, a language I didn't know yet understood on some deep, instinctual level. I set the photograph down, hands trembling, pulse quickened. The hallway ahead narrowed, darker now, ceiling sagging in places. Faint scratches marked the walls, long and jagged like fingernails scraping wood. The whispers circled me from multiple directions, overlapping, forming a pattern I couldn't follow. I stopped mid-step. A soft tapping echoed from somewhere ahead. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The rhythm was deliberate, almost taunting. My flashlight caught a flicker of movement just beyond the next crate. I held my breath. Nothing. I crouched beside a fallen crate, inspecting its contents. A journal lay inside, leather cracked, pages yellowed. The handwriting was small, meticulous, frantic in places. One entry caught my eye. They are here when no one should be. I can hear them breathing in the walls. My stomach lurched. The whispers seemed to swell around me, pressing against my ears. I couldn't tell if it was the building or if someone or something had been leaving these messages, listening, always listening. I moved slowly through the maze of crates, the whispers ebbing and flowing like waves. They were close now, brushing against the edges of comprehension. Each turn revealed another pile of scattered papers, more photographs, subtle shifts in crates that hadn't been there moments ago. The warehouse felt alive, aware, responding to my presence. I realized I had become part of its rhythm, the whispers entwining with my own heartbeat, guiding me without explanation. A faint glimmer caught my eye, a metal door partially hidden behind a stack of crates. I approached it. The whispers peaked, urgent but indecipherable. My hand hovered over the handle. The air smelled stronger here, metallic and cold. Something behind the door stirred, a faint shadow impossible to identify. I pulled my hand back, suddenly aware of how alone I truly was. Yet I couldn't leave. The compulsion to know, to see what lay beyond, burned in my chest. I stepped back into the center of the room, scanning the darkness. Shadows pooled unnaturally, corners seeming to stretch further than they should. The whispers spiraled around me, layers of sound, hints of voices trapped in time, voices forgotten yet unwilling to rest. I pressed my palm against a crate, feeling a faint tremor, a heartbeat of its own. I realized the warehouse wasn't empty. It never had been. It remembered. It waited. A sudden calm settled, almost comforting, and I took a slow breath. The whispers receded slightly, as if granting me a momentary reprieve. Yet the pressure remained, latent and patient. The warehouse had stories to tell, voices to share, and I was only beginning to understand how unwilling it was to reveal everything. I knew, deep down, that this was not just an exploration of space, but of memory, of presence, of things that lingered long after life had moved on. I glanced back toward the corridor I had entered from. The path seemed altered, crates shifted, shadows thicker. The whispers lingered in the corners, teasing, urging me forward. I realized the building was alive in ways I couldn't yet measure, shaping my perception, guiding me into its labyrinth. Every step I took carried me deeper into forgotten voices, deeper into stories that should have remained buried. And as I stood there, the whispers surrounding me, I knew this was only the beginning. The warehouse had claimed my attention. It had drawn me into its rhythm, its dark memory, and I would not leave unchanged. Something waited still in the shadows beyond, patient, deliberate, and aware of me in ways I couldn't yet understand. The narrow corridor ended abruptly in a wall of crates stacked impossibly high, but at the center, something didn't belong. A door. Metal, old and rusted, with a handle thick with grime and age. I hadn't seen it before. It hadn't been in any photograph or note, yet here it was, staring at me with a weight that made my chest tight. Something about it felt deliberate, hidden, not by accident, but by design. I stepped closer, flashlight beam trembling slightly, and ran my fingers over the cold metal. The surface was rough, pitted with rust. Yet underneath I could feel a faint warmth, subtle, almost imperceptible. The whispers had followed me here, circling from the corners, soft and indecipherable, as though urging me to notice, to understand. My pulse quickened. Why hadn't I seen this before? Had the warehouse shifted again? Or had I simply been blind? I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. No creak, no draft, just a dull hum of the building settling around me. My breath caught. Part of me wanted to leave, to turn back into the hallways I already knew, but the pull was irresistible. I could almost feel history pressing against the other side, waiting for recognition. Slowly, I gripped the handle. It didn't budge. Locked. Not with a key, not with force. Locked in a way that suggested secrecy, containment. I circled the door, inspecting the frame, looking for seams or weak points. The warehouse smelled different here. Sharper, metallic, faintly sweet, like blood mingled with old dust. My flashlight caught a faint scratch in the wall beside the door, long, deliberate, scored as if someone had tried to mark it, leave a warning. The whispers swelled slightly, brushing at my mind, teasing with shapes of words I almost understood. I shivered. Whoever or whatever had locked this room had meant to keep it hidden. I pressed my palm against the door, feeling the vibration of the wall, subtle but insistent. My imagination raced. What could be behind it? Old records, crates of forgotten goods, or something else entirely? The warehouse had been full of shadows, voices, movements I couldn't explain. This door seemed like the heart of it all, the epicenter of memory and presence. I traced the rim of the metal handle again, thinking about how long it might have been sealed, who had placed it there, and why. The air around the door felt alive, almost heavier than the rest of the hallway. I stepped back, letting my gaze roam over the surrounding crates. Their shadows leaned toward the door, converging as if the room itself had grown aware of my inspection. A faint humming began beneath my feet, low, subtle, almost indistinguishable from the natural settling of the warehouse. Yet my mind recognized it instantly as something else, something conscious. The whispers were quieter now, holding tension like a drawn breath. I knelt beside a loose floorboard near the door. The plank lifted easily, revealing a thin, narrow slit beneath. Dust-coated papers peeked out. I lifted them carefully, old invoices, lists, handwritten notes in frantic script. Many were decades old, names and dates blurred. One stood out. "Do not enter the locked room. They watch even when no one is here." My stomach twisted. Who had written this? Who was warning me? Or was it a confession? The warehouse seemed to pulse around me, alive with unanswered questions. The whispers shifted again, layering atop one another. I could swear I made out syllables now, fragments of sentences. Never leave eyes, remember, not empty. The fragments were disjointed, haunting, pressing at the edges of comprehension. I swallowed hard and straightened, turning back to the door. The handle's metal was colder now, almost biting against my palm. The room beyond called without words, a presence behind the steel that demanded acknowledgement. I circled the door once more, flashlight scanning the floor and walls. Faint scratches marked the concrete, long lines that hadn't been there moments before, or at least hadn't been obvious. A small rusted padlock hung loose at the side of the door, broken, yet the door remained sealed. How had it stayed closed for all these years? Something about it suggested more than physical restraint. It suggested intent, an invisible hand keeping what was inside trapped. I stepped back and allowed my eyes to roam the hallway. Shadows leaned differently here, denser than I remembered, almost forming shapes, silent figures that dissolved when I blinked. The whispers threaded through the air like silk, soft but insistent. I felt as if they were coaxing me to look closer, to understand. I could feel a rhythm, subtle and unnerving, beneath the ordinary sounds of the warehouse. My pulse raced, heart hammering against the stillness of the space. A creak echoed from behind a stack of crates. My flashlight swung instinctively, catching a glimpse of movement at the corner of my vision. Something shifted, a shadow darker than the rest, and then it was gone. I exhaled slowly, heart still pounding. The room behind that door didn't want to be discovered easily. Or maybe it didn't want me to see it at all. My instinct urged me to leave, to retreat to the familiarity of the outer aisles, but the compulsion to uncover the truth anchored me in place. I knelt again to inspect the floor near the door. Small, shallow indentations marred the concrete like claws or tools had scraped the surface repeatedly. They led toward the door, ending abruptly at the threshold. The pattern felt deliberate, almost ritualistic. I traced one with my fingertip. The whispers flared in response, brief and urgent, pressing at the back of my mind. I pulled my hand back, shaken, realizing the room was not only hidden, it was defended, marked, protected by forces I couldn't explain. A faint metallic scent grew stronger, curling around the edges of the air like smoke. My flashlight caught something glimmering at the threshold of the door, a thin crack, almost invisible. I knelt, pressing closer, and could see only darkness beyond, nothing else. But I felt it, something waiting there, patient, deliberate, aware of my presence. The whispers circled, growing more insistent, yet retreating from clarity. It was a paradoxical comfort and warning. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cold metal. The warehouse seemed to breathe around me, and I felt a strange intimacy with the door, a connection to whatever had been locked away. My mind swirled with possibilities, records, forgotten machinery, or something else, something that had lived here long after the human memory of the place had faded. The whispers teased my imagination with fragmented phrases I could almost understand. A faint thump echoed behind me, somewhere deep in the warehouse. I spun, flashlight sweeping the aisles, empty. The door remained immovable, steadfast. Yet the sensation of being observed intensified, pressing against my senses like a physical weight. The warehouse had been quiet, then alive, and now it seemed sentient, aware of me, testing my resolve. The whispers brushed closer, almost tangible now, fingers of sound that grazed my consciousness. I ran my fingers along the door again, lingering at the handle. There was no keyhole, no mechanism I could manipulate. The whispers swirled like wind through a narrow shaft, pressing against me, almost speaking through my thoughts. Do you see us? Do you understand? Do you belong here? The questions weren't words. They were feelings, impressions, nudging me towards something I couldn't yet name. My stomach churned, a mix of dread and curiosity that refused to yield. I stepped back, flashlight swinging across the hallway. The shadows had thickened, pressing at the edges of perception. Something shifted among the crates, subtle, deliberate. I blinked and it vanished. Yet the air felt charged, heavy with anticipation. I realized I had become part of the rhythm, part of the warehouse's memory, pulled toward the locked room as if by gravity I couldn't resist. I crouched once more near the threshold, peering into the faint crack along the metal door. Nothing moved, yet I could feel the presence inside, patient, waiting, aware. The whispers flared one final time, pressing at the edges of comprehension. Remember, stay, never leave, and then silence. The weight lingered, heavy and unresolved. I straightened, exhaling slowly. I knew I would not leave without answers, though the answers remained elusive. The door had revealed nothing, yet it had made its presence known in every shadow, every whisper, every subtle vibration beneath my hands. I realized that the warehouse itself had secrets it was unwilling to release completely, and I, for all my curiosity, had only begun to understand how carefully it guarded its memories. I stepped back from the door, scanning the hallway once more. Shadows leaned differently now, shapes curling at the edges of perception. The whispers had retreated slightly but lingered like smoke caught in the rafters. The locked room was patient, waiting for me to return, waiting for me to understand. I felt the weight of unanswered questions pressing against my mind. And as I moved away, my flashlight beam tracing the warped floorboards, I knew one thing. This was no ordinary warehouse. It was alive in ways I couldn't yet measure. The locked room was the heart of it, patient, deliberate, and aware of my presence in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. The whispers had promised nothing, yet hinted at everything, and I realized that the story of this place was far from finished. The first night was supposed to be easy, routine. Walk in, check the cameras, note the doors, and sit in the security booth until dawn. The factory had been decommissioned for months. No workers, no machines running, nothing but dust and the hollow hum of empty halls. I should have known better. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Oil, rust, and something sweeter, almost like decayed fabric. My boots echoed across the concrete floor. a steady rhythm that somehow made the emptiness feel larger, more pronounced. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting swaths of yellow through the darkness, revealing rows of abandoned machinery. They were silent now, frozen like time itself had stopped mid-operation. I set up the camera monitors, adjusting the angle to cover the main hall and the side corridors. Nothing unusual. A quiet hum of electricity, the faint whir of an old ventilation system. My own breathing seemed too loud in the silence. I laughed softly at my nerves. First night jitters, nothing more. But then I heard it. A knock, soft, deliberate, from somewhere deep in the factory. Metal on metal, distant but clear. I froze. My hand hovered over the radio, but I told myself it was probably the building settling. Old factories did that. Rusty pipes shift, floors expand, machines contract. Logical, plausible, safe. But my stomach didn't agree. My chest tightened, my pulse spiking. Another knock. Same rhythm. Tap, pause, tap, pause. Closer now, echoing off walls I hadn't noticed, bouncing from corners like it was following me. I swallowed hard, flashlight swinging toward the sound. The beam hit a hallway that led to the storage area. Shadows pooled at the far end, and my mind refused to label them as empty space. I walked slowly, each step measured, the floor groaning under my weight. The farther I went, the colder the air became. I reached the end of the hall, flashlight sweeping across crates and machinery. Nothing moved. Nothing should move. And yet the knocking continued, faint, irregular now, almost impatient. I pressed my hand against a metal support beam, feeling the vibration through the steel. Someone or something was here, but there was no one. I circled back toward the booth, trying to shake it off. Maybe it was rats, maybe loose metal, maybe shadows playing tricks on tired eyes. My mind raced, cataloging possibilities, refusing to settle on any one explanation. I reached the booth, picked up the notebook I had to keep, and wrote, "First night, no incidents." The words felt hollow. The knocking had stopped. For now. Sitting in the booth, I tried to focus on the monitors. Hallways were empty, machines still. But every so often, a shadow flickered across the far corner of the frame, a movement too quick to be caught clearly and yet undeniably there. I leaned closer, squinting, breathing shallow. The air was different here, thicker, heavier. It pressed against my chest. I felt like a guest in someone else's home. I checked the cameras again. Nothing. Nothing that could explain the sound, the cold, the shadows that seemed to slip around corners. My eyes darted back to the hallway beyond the booth. I thought I saw a figure crouched near the far wall, motionless. I blinked. Nothing. My pulse raced. A low hum filled the booth, something beneath the regular buzz of electronics. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but I could feel it vibrating in my bones. I stood, flashlight in hand, walking toward the hallway again. The air was colder here, damp, smelling faintly of mold and something metallic like blood. My boots echoed, louder than before, bouncing off walls that seemed closer than they should be. I tried calling out. "Hello, security, anyone here?" My voice sounded strange, swallowed by the vast empty space. No answer. Only the building breathing around me. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Faster now, lighter, almost a whisper of a sound against metal. I froze mid-step. The knocking seemed closer, and yet I could not see the source. I could feel it, a presence at the edges of vision, a subtle pressure pressing against my senses. My flashlight shook in my hand. I swallowed. Curiosity warred with fear. My duty demanded investigation. My instinct screamed retreat. I moved forward toward the source of the sound. The beam caught stacks of crates, machinery frozen in time, peeling paint on walls, broken windows letting in shafts of moonlight that fell like silver knives across the floor. Shadows danced unnaturally. My breathing quickened, shallow, sharp. Tap, 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 closer still. My heart thudded in rhythm with the sound, and I realized I had stopped moving. The knocking had stopped too. Silence pressed down like a weight. A sudden draft swept through the hall, rustling papers on the floor, lifting a thin veil of dust. My flashlight flickered. My chest tightened. I turned slowly, feeling the walls press in, the shadows stretching. Something moved just at the corner of my vision. I blinked. Nothing, yet I felt it, watching, waiting, almost impatient. I stepped backward, careful, eyes never leaving the hallway. I returned to the booth, sat, shaking slightly, tried to rationalize old building, settling sounds, my imagination, stress, but the sensation lingered. Something had been here near the end of the hall, something not quite human, or at least not something I had expected. My notebook remained open, words empty. My flashlight beam swept the room again, slower this time. The monitors showed nothing unusual, yet I could feel it. Every shadow had weight now, every silence a presence. Time passed in small increments, marked only by the subtle shifts of the factory settling around me. Tappy-tap, a single knock from somewhere deep, almost polite. I held my breath. The sound seemed to come from multiple directions, echoing, folding over itself. My mind strained to track it, to make sense. I could not. I wrote in the notebook, tap somewhere in the hall. Foolish, pathetic, yet necessary. Documentation felt like armor. I stood again, flashlight high, moving slowly through the main hall, each step careful, measured. The shadows stretched across the floor, across machinery, across walls I hadn't noticed before. Tap-a-tap, not consistent, irregular. Almost like a language, a code I could not decipher. I felt a pull, a compulsion to follow, to understand. My instincts screamed no. My curiosity won. The hall opened into the main factory floor, cavernous, with old conveyor belts and machines frozen mid-operation. Dust floated in shafts of moonlight. I paused, scanning. The knocking had stopped, or had it? I could feel it in my chest, a vibration beneath my ribs, echoing, persistent. Something moved in the shadows beyond my beam. I stepped forward. The air seemed thicker here, charged with anticipation. My flashlight flickered again. I blinked, and there it was. A dark shape, just a hint, crouched near the base of a conveyor belt. Gone the moment I tried to focus. I backed away slowly, heart racing. The whispers began then, soft, almost melodic, curling around the edges of my perception. I shook my head. Nothing, just my imagination. Or had it been there all along? I stepped into the booth, sitting rigid, flashlight sweeping the hall continuously. The cameras showed nothing. Nothing. And yet I could feel it. Something waiting, something unseen, patient. Hours passed in uneven stretches. I dozed lightly, eyes half closed, flashlight across my chest. Tap, tap. The sound returned, distant, polite, persistent. My notebook lay open. Words smeared as my hand shook. I wrote again. Knocks, not consistent, maybe rats, maybe not. My heart refused calm. I sipped water, hands trembling. Every shadow felt alive now. Every echo, every draft, every shift of dust in the air whispered that I was not alone. Dawn crept slowly. The factory seemed to exhale with the rising sun. The taps faded, the shadows receded into the corners of the room. I sat in the booth, notebook full, exhausted, trembling, yet alive. I knew the factory had tested me. Its empty halls, its still machines, its shadows and whispers, they were alive in ways I could not yet understand. I left that night with questions that had no answers, and with the unnerving certainty that this was only the beginning. Something had noticed me. Something had observed, and it had waited for the right moment to make itself known. The knocks had stopped, but the feeling of being watched had not. I knew I would return because curiosity had its own weight, and because the factory had secrets it wanted me to find. The first footsteps came before I even realized I was listening for them. A soft, deliberate tap that didn't match the floorboards under my boots, echoing somewhere deeper in the building. I froze, flashlight trembling slightly in my grip, notebook clutched close. My pulse thumped louder than the sound itself, though the knocking hadn't returned. Only the echo of something moving unseen. I told myself it was nothing. An animal, perhaps. A bird trapped inside, maybe a stray cat that had wandered in through some broken vent. I rationalized, traced the sound in my head. Yet as I moved down the corridor, my boots striking the concrete, each step seemed to answer with another footfall. Not mine, not yet close enough to see, but matching my pace. The air had grown colder. Not just the damp chill of the factory, but something else, a pressure that made my chest tight and lungs work harder. Shadows stretched across the walls in angles that didn't align with the fixtures or my flashlight. I turned slowly, sweeping the beam across crates and machinery, but nothing moved. Nothing should move. And yet the feeling persisted like eyes on my back, a slow crawl along my spine. I stopped in the middle of the hall, listening. Footsteps. Slower now, deliberate, careful, padded almost, but distinct. They didn't seem to follow a path that made sense. Around corners, across side rooms, echoing from above, though I knew the second floor had been boarded up for years. I told myself it was imagination. My first week of night shifts. Too much coffee. Too much solitude. And yet each tap seemed to carry intent, as if the building itself was testing me. I stepped forward cautiously, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The floor groaned under my weight, a deep moan that seemed to respond to my own presence. The footsteps shifted, fading, reappearing like whispers that moved with the air. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. I could feel my own fear thickening, pooling in my chest. I tried to map the sound, walking slowly down the main corridor. My flashlight picked out the jagged edges of broken glass, peeling paint, rusting machinery frozen mid-operation. Each shadow cast by the beam seemed to stretch unnaturally, the walls curving where they shouldn't. Tap, 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 closer now. I halted. The beam swept left, right, every inch of the hall. Nothing. Silence, but heavy, pregnant with movement I could not see. I moved toward a side doorway that led to the storage rooms. Dust floated in the thin slivers of moonlight sneaking through broken windows. The steps followed, always behind me, never visible, always moving with me, though the hallway appeared empty. I felt an absurd, irrational urge to call someone, anyone, just to hear a human voice. But I was alone. I had chosen this. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, careful not to let it shake. As I walked, the footsteps changed again. Faster now, lighter, as if dancing across metal and concrete. I froze, listening, chest tight. I wondered for the first time if the building was alive, if it could watch, move, decide. The walls, the ceilings, the floorboards, they were old, yes, but something else seemed present, aware. Something patient. Something that had waited for me. I edged down the hallway, every nerve alert. Each corner I rounded brought the sensation closer, the tap, 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 like an echo of my own heartbeat, but not my own. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. The shadows remained static. Yet the footsteps followed, winding around corners, appearing and disappearing in ways that defied logic. I could feel a pattern in them, subtle, deliberate, as if guiding me somewhere. A draft brushed past my neck, cold and moist, lifting my hair. I turned quickly, flashlight swinging. Nothing. Only crates, old machinery, and the dim moonlight casting long, unnatural angles. I took another step and the air seemed to shift, vibrating softly, a low hum threading through the concrete, through the steel, through my bones. I stopped again, footsteps, closer but still out of sight. I held my breath, listening, straining. I tried to convince myself it was just acoustics, just my imagination. But the footsteps began to interact with my movements, timing themselves to my pauses, to my breaths. I dared not move for long stretches, heart pounding, willing them to reveal themselves. A light at the end of the hallway, flickering in the distance, caught my eye. Not electric, not natural, just a faint glow that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the steps. I stepped forward. Tap, tap, tap. I froze again. The sound shifted, became lighter, sharper, a subtle staccato that whispered through the empty space. The hallway seemed longer than it had before, stretching into impossible angles. I realized then that the factory wasn't just empty. It had layers, depths that my eyes couldn't track, corners I could not map. And something moved within them, always moving, never fully seen. I reached a junction where several hallways met. The steps stopped. Silence pressed in, heavy and thick. I spun slowly, flashlight sweeping left, right, forward, backward. Nothing. The building seemed to exhale around me, a subtle vibration in the walls, like a heartbeat beneath the concrete. I wondered, with a knot of terror, if I had ever truly been alone. I pressed on, following the faint glow I had seen earlier. The floor was littered with debris, old pallets, twisted metal, crates covered in dust. Each step kicked up tiny clouds of particles that floated in the thin beams of light. Tap, tap, tap returned, this time above me, echoing from a balcony I hadn't noticed before. My flashlight flickered, my chest tight. I could feel my hands trembling, yet I could not stop. Curiosity demanded forward motion. Fear demanded retreat. I stepped onto the old mezzanine, feeling the metal grate beneath my boots. Shadows pooled in corners, waiting. Tap, tap, a rhythm deliberate, echoing against walls, steel beams, machinery frozen in mid-operation. I realized then that the footsteps weren't random. They were leading me, or testing me, or both. I tried to trace them, following the rhythm, but each step I took was mirrored by silence, then resumed when I paused. A sudden draft lifted dust and paper into the air. I caught the scent of something metallic, iron, old, long forgotten. I blinked. Something moved at the far edge of the mezzanine, a shadow slipping along the wall faster than I could track. My pulse spiked. I froze. Tap, tap continued, but now irregular, mocking, teasing. My flashlight shook. I gripped it tighter, staring into the darkness, listening to the building breathe around me. The hallway stretched into a dark void below. I knew the factory was silent, decommissioned. And yet I could hear layers of sound, echoing footsteps, rustling, vibrations I could not place. Tap-a-tap, a whisper of movement just out of sight. I swallowed hard. Every instinct told me to run, but I could not leave. The footsteps were a message, a lure, a test. Something in the building wanted me to continue, wanted me to understand. I followed the rhythm down a side corridor. Shadows pooled along the walls, objects slightly shifted from where I remembered them. Tap, tap, now behind me, yet I could not pinpoint it. I stopped, flashlight sweeping every angle. The hall seemed alive, breathing, responding to me. Dust rose from the floor as though exhaled. My heart pounded, my mind racing. I questioned my own senses. Was the building alive, or had my fear taken form? I reached the end of the corridor. A room lay ahead, door hanging slightly ajar. Tap, tap stopped. Silence. Heavy pressing complete. I shivered, taking in the sight. Inside, the room was filled with old machinery, crates stacked haphazardly, and shadows that did not align with the beam of my flashlight. Something waited here, I felt it, patient and deliberate. My pulse slowed. But dread remained. I took one last step forward, notebook in hand, flashlight steady. I scribbled. Footsteps echo in empty corridors, building seems alive, something follows. Words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. I knew that tonight had changed the factory. It was no longer just a building. It was a presence, observant, patient, and aware. And I was inside its domain, bound by curiosity, fear, and the unseen rhythm that followed my every move. The cold hit me before I even noticed it. Not the kind of cold that comes from the night air slipping through broken windows, but a deep, sharp chill that wrapped around my bones and lingered there. My breath came out in misty plumes, curling and fatting in the weak light of my flashlight. I rubbed my arms, trying to force warmth into them, but it was useless. The air itself seemed to have thickened, pressing against me with invisible weight. I had been down the corridor only minutes ago. I remembered it well, the door at the end cracked open just enough to slip through. But now when I reached for the handle, it didn't budge. Locked. I shook it, rattled the knob, each movement echoing louder than it should have in the empty hall. I swore it had been open, hadn't it? My mind tried to rationalize it. Drafts. The old hinges swelling in the night moisture. Nothing fit. Nothing explained the sudden bite in the air or the door refusing my touch. I stepped back, flashlight sweeping the hallway. The light trembled in my grip as I took slow, careful breaths, listening. There was a subtle sound almost beneath the floorboards, a whisper of motion that shouldn't have been there. I couldn't place it. Was it footsteps? Or the building itself, settling, stretching, breathing? The thought made my skin crawl. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Not just in the hallway, but inside the building, inside its walls. I moved along the corridor, trying other doors. Some gave way, creaking like old bones. Others, like that first one, resisted. Cold spots appeared where I hadn't noticed them before, patches of air that chilled my skin in ways the draft couldn't. One doorway exhaled icy air as I approached, making my teeth chatter. My flashlight beam danced over peeling paint and rusted machinery, but shadows moved strangely in the edges of my vision. I blinked, and they were gone, leaving only the faint pulse of cold against my skin. I returned to the locked door, pressing my ear against it. Nothing. Silence, heavy and thick, but somehow alive. I could feel a vibration through the frame, a low hum that didn't belong to the building's structure. I traced the outline of the door with my hand, fingertips brushing rough wood and splintered edges, and a shiver ran from my hand to my shoulder. Something waited behind it. I was certain. Something patient, deliberate, unseen. A soft scraping came from somewhere deeper in the hall. My flashlight snapped toward the sound, but there was nothing, only the shifting shadows of crates and forgotten machinery. I swallowed, heart hammering, and felt my pulse echo in my ears, mingling with the whisper of the cold. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, but curiosity anchored me in place. The locked door, the icy patches, the faint sound, they were all connected, I was sure of it. I circled the door again, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The cold seemed to grow stronger as I approached, as if it were alive, breathing in response to me. My boots left faint echoes on the concrete, each one a tiny drum against the building's pulse. Then from the corner of my eye, movement, a shadow shifting across the wall faster than I could track. I spun, flashlight swinging, and nothing remained. Just the cold pressing in, a weight I couldn't see but could feel in my chest. I tested the door one more time, still locked. Frustration crept in, sharp and bitter. I tried to rationalize again. Maybe the lock had swelled with moisture, maybe a breeze had slammed it shut. I forced my hands to stop shaking, took a deep breath. And then I noticed it, faint scratches along the door frame, tiny grooves in the wood I hadn't seen before. They were recent, fresh. And they weren't random, they traced a pattern, deliberate, like something or someone had been trying to get out, or in. I backed away, flashlight sweeping the corridor. The cold patches seemed to shift, moving along the walls, pooling near doorways, retreating when I stepped too close. My mind reeled. I had worked nights in empty buildings before. I had been alone in dark spaces, but nothing like this. The factory seemed to breathe, exhaling icy currents, shifting doors, shadows that moved when I didn't. Something had changed tonight. Something had awakened. A noise came from above me, a soft creak like a floorboard giving way under weight. My flashlight flicked upward, catching glimpses of the second floor I hadn't noticed before. Dust floated in the weak beam, suspended in the air, but there were no footprints, no disturbance. And yet I knew it had moved. I could feel it. Something was watching, waiting, testing me, stretching my perception of space, time, reason. I retraced my steps down the hall, trying doors that had been opened before. One swung shut as I approached, a slam that echoed like a gunshot. The air thickened, carrying the scent of something metallic, old and tangy, iron and rust. I gagged slightly, swallowing down panic. The locked door at the end of the hall seemed to mock me, holding its secrets tightly behind wood and frame. I realized then that it wasn't just locked physically, it was locked by intention. Someone, something, had decided it would not open tonight. I moved closer to it, flashlight beam steady, hands gripping the handle. I tried to peer through the cracks, but darkness swallowed the view. The cold pressed against my face, and I realized with a shiver that it was different from the air around the rest of the hall. Denser, concentrated. A presence I could almost taste, metallic and sharp, lingering at the edges of reason. I traced the scratches again, fingertips trembling. They were deep enough to draw blood if pressed too hard. I pulled back. Not ready yet. Not ready to confront whatever waited behind that door. I stepped back into the hall, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The footsteps I had heard the night before were gone, replaced now by silence that was heavier than any sound. But the cold remained, shifting along the floor, climbing the walls, pooling around doorways. I realized the building was teaching me its rules, testing me, showing me patterns I couldn't yet understand. Each patch of ice, each locked door, each subtle creak, it was deliberate, purposeful. And I was still here, a witness to its quiet game. I decided to explore another corridor, trying to gather my courage to understand. The walls were slick with condensation, the air sharp with chill. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, fleeting but insistent, as if someone or something was moving just beyond the reach of light. I noticed objects slightly out of place, crates shifted, machinery misaligned. The building was alive in subtle ways, responding to me, interacting with me, bending its space around my perception. A faint noise drew me back to the locked door. A whisper, soft as exhaled air, barely audible, carried from behind the frame. I froze. I held my breath, straining to hear. It came again, a barely there sound, rhythmic like scratching claws or fingernails moving over rough wood. My pulse raced. I wanted to flee. I wanted to ignore it, but something compelled me to stay, to observe, to understand. The door had a story. I had to know it. I ran my fingers over the scratches once more. Tiny splinters pricked my skin. The cold pressed harder, a living thing, curling around my hands, climbing my arms, reaching toward my chest. I could feel it in my bones, in my lungs, in the subtle vibration beneath the concrete floor. I realized then that the factory was not empty, not truly. It held memories, intentions, a presence that lingered just out of sight. The locked door was a boundary, and I was testing it. I stepped back, trying to steady myself. The cold receded slightly, though the air remained sharper than the hallways I had walked before. I jotted a note in my book: cold spots, locked doors, scratches, something alive. Words felt inadequate, meaningless against the presence I could sense. I knew then that the factory wasn't just a building. It was aware. It had patience. It had memory. And it had waited for me. I returned to the hall, flashlight beam sweeping slowly, observing each doorway, each shadow, each patch of icy air. The cold moved again, shifting like water pooling in corners, retreating when approached, rising when ignored. I felt my pulse synchronize with it, my senses heightened to every subtle vibration, every whisper, every shadow. I realized with a sinking certainty that the locked door was only the beginning. Something inside the factory was learning, responding, growing aware of me. Each step I took was mirrored in silence, each breath measured against the unseen presence. I knew it had noticed me. I could feel its attention, patient and deliberate, waiting for me to act. The scratches, the cold, the locked doors, they were all communication, subtle and insistent. And I had understood enough to know that tonight, the factory had begun to teach me its language. I left the door, but not the feeling it carried. Each corridor, each hall, each patch of ice held its echo. I knew I would return. I would need to understand the patterns, the intentions, the presence behind the locked wood. But for now, I recorded my observations, my breath forming clouds in the icy air, my pulse still racing. The building had secrets, and I had glimpsed them, just enough to know that the night was far from over. The office was supposed to be gone. I had walked this floor countless times, scanning rusted machinery, piles of abandoned crates, and broken furniture. There were doors I had opened before, empty offices with peeling paint and dust-thick carpets. But tonight, the hidden office revealed itself, not as a sudden entrance, but as if the building exhaled it into existence. A faint outline in the shadows, a slight depression in the wall, almost invisible, almost easy to miss. My flashlight caught the edges, flickering against the doorframe. I stepped closer, my heart thudding, every nerve taut. The air smelled heavier here, a combination of old paper, mildew, and something coppery beneath it. I pressed my palm against the wood. It felt warmer than the surrounding walls. Alive, maybe. The handle turned smoothly, too smoothly, and the door creaked open with the kind of slow, deliberate sound that made me step back and swallow hard. Inside, the room was small, cramped, yet suffocating in its presence. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their metal surfaces dulled by time. Dust motes danced in the narrow beam of my flashlight, swirling like restless spirits. A single desk sat in the middle, top cluttered with yellowed files, loose papers, and a tarnished brass lamp, the bulb long dead. I could feel the weight of the space, the history pressing against me as though the office remembered everything it had witnessed. I moved to the desk and ran my fingers over the files. The first folder bore the word INCIDNTS in heavy black letters. My stomach tightened. I opened it slowly, careful not to disturb whatever energies lingered here. Inside, reports, handwritten notes, and photographs documented accidents, near misses, unexplained disappearances. The words blurred as my mind raced. Names, dates, short accounts of men and women vanishing in hallways, machines malfunctioning without cause, strange injuries with no witnesses. One photograph made me pause, an empty hallway, just like the one I'd walked down hours ago, but with faint footprints trailing into darkness, never returning. A draft whispered past me, rattling the cabinet drawers. I spun, flashlight slicing the dim space, but there was no one. I shook my head, forcing reason to surface. Dust settled in strange patterns, corners that seemed untouched for decades, yet tonight showed traces of movement. I could feel the building shifting around me, almost guiding me toward the next file, the next revelation. The next folder was labeled Missing. Its contents were more unsettling than the first. Detailed notes of employees who had vanished, sometimes overnight, sometimes during routine shifts. Their last locations, their routines, sketches of floor plans highlighting corridors and doors. I traced the lines with my finger. One of the sketches matched the corridor where I had felt the cold spots last week. My pulse jumped. The building had memory. It was recording, observing, waiting. I noticed something odd about the photographs in the files. Faces blurred in parts, as if smudged deliberately, but in a way that wasn't accidental. Someone or something had erased details, leaving only the outlines of features. I frowned, feeling a strange, creeping unease. The files were meant to preserve history, yet they had been tampered with. Why? And by whom? Or what? A noise drew me back, a faint scuffing from behind the desk. My flashlight flicked toward it. Nothing. The air grew colder here than anywhere else in the warehouse. I could see my breath curling in front of me. The shadows seemed to thicken, the corners darkening as if they were absorbing light. And then I realized the building itself seemed alive. Not conscious, not in a human sense, but aware of my presence. It was measuring, reacting, waiting. I opened another file, this one labeled ACCIDNTS. The notes detailed strange machinery malfunctions, slips and falls that should have been impossible. One entry described a worker disappearing beneath a conveyor belt, only for the belt to continue moving as if nothing had happened. Another told of a man trapped in a storage closet, banging against the walls until the sound stopped abruptly. Some notes were detailed, others were hastily scrawled. All carried the same weight. Something inside this building didn't want to be ignored. As I sifted through the papers, I felt a shift in the room's atmosphere. The shadows on the walls stretched, elongated, moving in ways that contradicted the flashlight's beam. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced it was fatigue. But then I saw it again, an outline faint but unmistakable, like a figure leaning against the wall behind me. I turned sharply. Nothing. Only the dull filing cabinets, the desk, the papers. The room held its breath. I could feel it pressing against me, almost whispering my name, teasing my thoughts. I noticed one file that had been tucked away under the desk. Its edges were frayed, almost as if it had been hidden deliberately. I slid it out. The label was nearly illegible, but I made out notes confidential. Inside were sketches, floor plans, notes on security routines, and most disturbingly, first-hand accounts from workers describing voices, moving shadows, and doors that locked themselves. Some mentioned a cold that wrapped around them like a living thing, pulling at their limbs, their awareness. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. These weren't stories, they were warnings. A gust of wind, or was it a shift in the air, rattled the window panes. The lamp on the desk teetered, dust scattering across the files. I froze, listening. The room seemed to pulse, every corner vibrating subtly, a rhythm almost imperceptible. And then I heard it, a whisper, low, indecipherable, curling around my ears, brushing my mind. I jerked the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. Only the room, only the papers, only the cold pressing in. I tried to focus, to catalog what I had found. The office wasn't just hidden physically, it had been hidden from memory. Its histories erased, altered, smudged. Yet tonight it had called to me, revealing fragments, clues, and horrors I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The files hinted at patterns, a slow accumulation of events over years. Accidents, disappearances, whispers, shadows, cold. The building wasn't random. It was intentional, and I was stepping into its game. Another gust, stronger this time, shook the doorframe. I glanced toward the corridor beyond, faint light bleeding through cracks. The building exhaled around me, shifting subtly, making me aware that it was not static. Doors I had passed hours ago might be open or closed now. Corners of hallways warped, sounds displaced. I had learned enough from the files to realize that my understanding of space here was unreliable. Every step carried risk. Every movement was monitored by something unseen. I returned to the desk, rifling through the last few files. The air grew heavier, almost viscous, pressing against my chest. My flashlight caught a small notebook tucked beneath the other papers. Its pages were filled with frantic handwriting, detailing the final days of a man named Calder who had worked here decades ago. His notes were desperate, talking of shadows that watched, whispers in empty rooms, doors that resisted his touch, cold that moved and lingered. The final page was smeared, words half legible. "It knows, it waits. Don't." And then the rest was scratched out, violently, almost as if something had reached through the page itself. I stepped back, the weight of realization settling like a stone in my gut. The building didn't just witness events, it influenced them, manipulated them, protected secrets, hid dangers, toyed with memory. And I had uncovered a fraction tonight. The hidden office was a node, a center of observation, and every file, every note, every photograph was a fragment of what the building wanted me to see, to learn, to remember. I felt the cold creep along my spine, prickling my neck, threading down my arms. The shadows seemed thicker now, more deliberate. Every creak, every whisper, every minor shift in the room's temperature felt purposeful. I realized the office had revealed itself for a reason, and that reason wasn't comfort. It was warning. It was challenge. It was acknowledgement of my presence in a place that measured, reacted, and remembered. I closed the files slowly, my hands trembling. The office didn't offer warmth or clarity, only fragments and unease. Yet even as I prepared to leave, I noticed one detail that hadn't registered before. The door, slightly ajar when I had entered, now pressed subtly against its frame, resisting as if testing me again. I pressed my hand to it. The cold radiated, sharper this time, as if the building itself was reminding me of the power it held. I stepped into the corridor, leaving the hidden office behind but carrying its weight in my mind. Each cold patch, each shadow, each whisper I had read about in the files now had context. The building had a memory, a will, a presence I could feel pressing against my awareness. And tonight I had become a part of that history, added my own footprints, my own breaths, my own fear to the record it held. The corridor stretched before me, familiar yet altered, doors slightly shifted, shadows deeper than I remembered. The hidden office remained behind me, its secrets tucked away in files, whispers, and cold. But I knew one thing the building would not forget. I would return. I would have to. And when I did, I would step more carefully, eyes wider, senses sharper, because the building was alive in ways I could barely comprehend, and it had taken notice of me. I had convinced myself the night would end. The first light would seep through cracked windows, shadows would shrink, and the cold would retreat into the corners. But the building had other plans. Morning never came here, not in the way I knew it. Time stretched, a slow elastic that pulled at my senses. My flashlight felt feeble, as if the darkness swallowed its beam before it could reach the walls. I stepped carefully over broken tiles, the crunch beneath my boots sounding unnervingly loud in the hollow space. The corridors twisted unnaturally, familiar turns leading me to areas I didn't remember. I stopped at the junction near the old shipping docks, listening. Silence answered me at first. Then the faintest scrape, like fingernails over concrete, echoed from somewhere ahead. I froze, heart hammering. Footsteps, or something else moving just beyond my perception. I gripped my flashlight tighter, the metal cold and heavy in my hand. Shadows pooled where the walls met the floor. The air carried a chill that wasn't from outside, a cold that seemed to bend around me, pressing at my skin. I remembered the files in the hidden office, the records of disappearances, accidents, and whispers. Names I had read now felt like warnings, specters etched into the building itself. Was it watching me, or had it always been waiting for me to stumble into its orbit? A door at the end of the hallway, one I could have sworn had been opened before, was now tightly shut. The metal handle glinted faintly in my flashlight's beam. I reached out instinctively. My fingers brushed cold steel. It resisted, barely budged. My knuckles whitened as I twisted, pushed, yanked. Nothing. I stepped back, exhaling, mind racing. Doors had been moving tonight, shifting positions. The building was alive in a way I didn't yet understand. I moved down the hall, eyes darting to each shadowed doorway. Every time I thought I saw an open room, it vanished. Every corridor seemed to stretch a little longer, pulling me forward, pulling me deeper. I could hear it then, soft scuffing behind me, not quite footsteps, not quite floorboards creaking. It didn't match my pace. It didn't match anything human. Yet it followed, patient, silent, deliberate. I tried to focus, to reason. Empty corridors, echoes bouncing oddly, drafts that made the hair on my arms rise. The warehouse was old, decayed, but nothing should move like this on its own. And yet I could feel presence, movement. The air shifted around me, subtle, almost like a heartbeat in the walls. Each time I paused, the scuffing stopped. Each time I moved, it resumed. Always behind, never near, never distant enough to ignore. I ducked into a side office, the small space cluttered with broken chairs and rusting filing cabinets. My flashlight swept over the walls. A calendar from decades ago, pages yellowed, hung crooked. The smell of rot lingered faintly. Dust swirled in the beam. And then I saw it on the wall, faint scratches forming a pattern, deliberate, precise, as if someone or something had been trying to leave a message. My chest tightened. I stepped closer. The scratches were not random. Lines and arcs, almost like symbols, but unfamiliar, alien. A sudden draft brushed my neck. I spun. The door to the office, which I had closed behind me, was now slightly ajar. I hadn't touched it. My flashlight beam caught the edge, flickering, revealing darkness that seemed to move inward like the shadows were breathing. I swallowed hard. The building was testing me, probing, shaping my movements, my awareness. I could feel it calculating, learning. I moved on, taking the narrow hallways toward the main floor. The concrete beneath my boots was slick in spots, though I couldn't see moisture. Cold seeped through my shoes, climbing my legs. I passed the old break room. Chairs were upended, tables tipped. And there across the floor, tiny footprints, barely visible, too small for any adult, too deliberate for random debris, trailing toward the storage area. My breath caught. I followed them cautiously. They stopped at a crate stacked against the wall. Nothing else. No one, just the quiet, and the sense that something had been there, watching. I reached the central office, my own small post, and paused. Papers scattered from drawers, lamps tilted. The clock on the wall ticked, but the sound felt hollow, distant, distorted. I noticed the window overlooking the main floor. No light, no hint of sunrise, only shadows pooling into one another. I shook my head, trying to rationalize. It was early, yes, but the sun should have touched these walls by now. The building had stolen time. I walked among the scattered papers, my flashlight tracing the surface of desks, the corners of the room. One file caught my eye, marked Security LOGS. I opened it. The entry stopped abruptly months ago, mid-sentence in one case. Reports of unexplained noises, shifts in doors, cold spots, and figures glimpsed in corridors. A handwritten note at the bottom of one page made my blood run cold. It watches. It waits. Morning is a lie. My hand trembled, and I closed the file quickly, not wanting to read further, yet unable to stop myself. A low creak echoed from the stairwell. I froze, listening. Then scuffing again, soft, deliberate, almost teasing. Behind me, I turned slowly. Nothing. My flashlight beam swept the office. Shadows clung to corners, moving slightly as though shifting in response to my gaze. I could feel presence. Not human, not material, but undeniable. And it had followed me from the hallways, through corridors to this room. I tried to convince myself I could leave. Step outside, walk to the street. But the doors all led to shadowed hallways that twisted in ways I did not remember. Each exit seemed further away than I knew it should be. I pressed my palm to a door, felt the cold radiate through the metal, and realized the building wasn't just hiding its secrets. It was enclosing, corralling, shaping my path. The walls weren't static. They were alive, responsive, sentient. I moved carefully, tracing the edges of corridors, flashlight scanning every corner. The air shifted with each step, cold waves brushing my face, around my neck, fingers prickling in my gloves. I could feel it behind me, moving silently, keeping distance, but always present. I didn't dare look back. Something told me it would be worse if I did. The files from the hidden office flashed in my mind, reminders of the building's memory. Names, dates, accidents, disappearances. I had joined the record. I passed the loading docks again. Moonlight, or what I assumed was moonlight, flickered through broken panes. Shadows pooled in unnatural shapes. And then I noticed it, the faintest movement at the edge of my vision, a dark silhouette gliding along the walls, stopping when I paused. Not human, not fully, but aware, calculating. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, willing it to cut through the gloom. Nothing resolved. Only shapes, only darkness that resisted clarity. I retraced steps I thought I knew, trying doors, corridors, hopping for an exit. Each hallway bent, stretched, as if the building's geometry had shifted while I wasn't looking. The footsteps, or the scuffing, continued, following, taunting, persistent. My mind raced, trying to grasp reality. Could a building do this? Could it hold time, shift space, manipulate presence? I didn't know, but each step I took confirmed one truth. Morning would not come for me here. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed. My flashlight flickered. The air thickened, smells of rust, mildew, and something iron-heavy pressing against my senses. I paused in the central corridor, trying to listen, trying to think. Silence stretched, then shifted. I could feel it moving, not quickly, but with certainty, an invisible hand brushing past me, guiding, watching, waiting. My skin prickled, goose flesh rising, breath shallow. I stepped forward again, unsure if I was leaving or being led. The shadows seemed deeper here, more defined, almost forming shapes that suggested movement, presence. I could hear my own pulse, irregular, echoing in my skull. And then faintly, the scuffing behind me quickened, just slightly, almost impatient. It had been following all night, never near, never far, but always tracking. And now, for the first time, it acknowledged me openly. I reached the main stairwell, flashlight cutting a swath through the darkness. Steps spiraled downward, leading to exits I hoped existed. But at the bottom, shadows pooled thicker than ever. I could see nothing beyond them. And yet I knew, I felt, it was there, moving silently, waiting for me to descend. Each step I took felt heavier, measured, deliberate. Morning had not come. It never would. The building had made that clear. I paused, heart hammering, breath shallow. I wanted to turn, to run, to leave, but the corridors behind me had shifted again. No exit felt final. No light promised safety. I realized with a sick certainty that whatever had followed me from the hallways, the hidden office, the shadows, it was patient, eternal. It didn't need to chase. It only needed to exist, to persist, to observe. And I was trapped in its presence. I stopped in the stairwell, flashlight casting narrow beams upward. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. And then I heard it, the faintest scuffing, now closer, deliberate, patient, not fast, not frantic, just moving endlessly, always behind. I swallowed, pressed the flashlight to my chest, and stepped forward. Each motion calculated, every breath careful. Morning never came here. And whatever followed me, whatever had learned my steps, was still moving. Silently, persistently. I didn't look back, I couldn't, but I could feel it. Always behind, always waiting, always aware. And as I descended into shadow once more, I realized the truth. The building would not let me leave its record. I had joined its history tonight. My movements, my fear, my breath, my pulse, all added to the memory it kept. Morning would not come. Not yet. Not ever, it seemed. The first step inside was a mistake I couldn't take back. The door groaned, metal hinges screaming against the empty space, echoing down corridors long forgotten. I had walked through abandoned buildings before, but this one, it didn't feel abandoned. Not really. Not yet. The air smelled of rust and dust, of wet concrete and something old, something decayed in a way that made the back of my throat tighten. I paused, listening. The silence wasn't empty. It pressed against me, thick and almost solid, moving with me, whispering in a language I didn't understand. My boots scuffed over broken tiles and scattered debris, and every sound bounced back warped, as though the building itself was swallowing it and spitting it back with delay. Shadows pooled in corners, deep, unnatural, like ink dropped into water. I moved further into the main hall. Sunlight filtered through shattered skylights, weak and uneven, catching on dust motes that hung in the air like suspended sparks. The walls were lined with rusting machinery, belts and gears frozen mid-motion, caked in decades of grime. I reached out to touch one. The metal was cold, oily, sticky beneath my fingers. The texture felt almost alive, as if it had absorbed years of labor, of sweat, of small, unnoticed suffering. A sudden gust stirred through the hall, rattling loose panels and sending a chill up my spine. I turned sharply. Nothing, but the shadows seemed to shift subtly, deliberately. Was it the wind, or was something watching me, moving just beyond the edges of my perception? I shook my head, trying to steady my breathing. Factories make noises. Old buildings make noises. I told myself that over and over, but the sound of dripping water echoed too regularly, like a clock keeping its own time, counting down something I didn't understand. I took another step and the floor groaned beneath me. The tiles buckled, edges jagged, sharp. My flashlight beam flicked across the wall. Old graffiti stared back at me, faded scrawls, warnings, signatures of people long gone. A sudden patch of black on the far wall caught my eye. At first I thought it was shadow, but it was deeper than that, like a hole in the air itself, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. I blinked. It was gone. Maybe a trick of my eyes, maybe something else. I moved cautiously down a side corridor, narrow, lined with doors that hung crooked in their frames. Some were missing entirely, leaving only gaping holes. The air grew colder here, damp and heavy. I could see my breath in shallow clouds. My gloves felt useless against it. Every step brought new textures: cracked concrete, flacking paint, rust flakes crunching underfoot. I reached a doorway and paused, peering in. Inside, machinery loomed in shadow, skeletal and silent. And there, on the far wall, a smear of something dark, brown, red, I couldn't tell, stretched in a shape almost humanoid. My stomach clenched. I wanted to move on, but curiosity kept me rooted. The further I went, the more the silence changed. It wasn't still, it was aware. The faintest scrape echoed somewhere behind me, a dragging sound that didn't match anything I could see. I stopped. The sound stopped. I held my breath. It came again, slower this time, deliberate, measured. Something or someone was moving through the building. I swung my flashlight in every direction, shadows jumping with each sweep, but no one was there. My pulse raced. I told myself it was an animal, rats, maybe. But the movement felt calculated, watching, patient. I took a deep breath and moved on, along a catwalk above the main floor. The metal grated underfoot, echoing, vibrating through my boots. The smell intensified here, pungent now, iron-tinged, as if something had been spilled and left to rot. My flashlight caught on a stairwell leading down. The steps were rusted, hollow-sounding. I considered going back, but the urge to explore pushed me forward. Each step downward made the air heavier, thicker, like walking into a fog that had weight. Below, the main production floor spread wide, machinery frozen mid-cycle, conveyor belts stiff with rust. I walked among them, careful not to touch anything. The air here was colder still. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter. I noticed small details, tiny claw marks along a metal panel, a shoe print in dust that hadn't been there before, a streak of moisture along the floor where it seemed none should have been. I wasn't alone. I couldn't be. A sudden knock, faint but sharp, echoed off the walls. I spun, flashlight sweeping wildly. Nothing. Silence, then the echo of my own heartbeat. I forced myself to laugh quietly, trying to shake it off. Buildings settle, pipes shift, doors move. But the knock came again, closer this time, deliberate, almost human. I froze, mind racing. I could feel it now. The sense of being observed followed. The shadows seemed to thicken, leaning in toward me. I moved toward the far end of the hall, passing stacks of crates and broken pallets. The floor sloped slightly, puddles forming where the roof had leaked. I stepped carefully, the water cold, seeping through my boots. The hall narrowed, machinery rising like cliffs on either side. My flashlight beam danced over rusted gears, twisted metal, coils and wires like entrails. Something caught in the corner of my eye, a flicker, a movement that vanished when I looked directly. My breath caught. I wasn't imagining it. The corridor ended in a small office, glass shattered, desk overturned. Papers littered the floor, yellowed and curling. I stepped in cautiously. My light swept the walls. Old calendars, notes, safety warnings peeling from corkboards. And then on the desk, a single sheet as if left for me. My name scrawled in shaky handwriting. I froze. My fingers itched to pick it up, but something in me hesitated. I wanted to convince myself it was coincidence, a prank, residue from a worker decades ago. But the air here, it was alive with expectation, waiting. I glanced at the door. The hallway stretched behind me, dark, endless. I could feel eyes in the shadows, unblinking, patient. The air moved faintly, brushing my hair, cold against my neck. I realized the building wasn't just empty, it was remembering. Every step I took, every sound I made, it cataloged. The shadows weren't just shapes. They were memories, echoes of those who had come before. I swallowed hard, chest tightening. I had become part of that record. I left the office, stepping carefully through debris. My flashlight flickered, threatening to fail. The main hall seemed to stretch further. Corridors bending slightly, doors in places I didn't remember passing. I stopped. There ahead, the faint outline of a figure, or what I thought was a figure, stood in the shadows, perfectly still. My breath caught. It didn't move as I did, didn't shift with my light. It waited, watching. I swung the flashlight and it vanished. Heart racing, I told myself it was imagination. But it was. I had felt its awareness. The smell intensified again, metallic, wet, earthy. I moved faster, boots echoing in rhythm with my own pulse. The building groaned, settling or reacting. I didn't stop. I had to know if the corridors would end, if the doors would open. Each step brought new textures, new sounds, flacking paint, dripping water, the scrape of metal. I felt eyes everywhere, in every corner, behind every shadow. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there, always there. I reached the stairwell back to the main entrance, or at least where I thought the entrance was. The air here was colder still, biting at my face and hands. I paused, hand on the railing, flashlight sweeping. A shadow shifted at the far end, just at the edge of perception. I blinked. Gone. My heartbeat pounded, each beat echoing in my skull. I had been walking for hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. The factory had its own time, its own rhythm, and it moved me along with it. The door to the outside loomed ahead, battered, rusted, heavy. I pushed, and it groaned in protest. The light outside was weak, pale, the sky gray. I stepped into it, chest heaving, taking in shallow breaths. I thought I was safe. I thought the building's reach ended at the threshold. But then a faint scuff behind me, a soft scraping over concrete. I froze. Nothing was there, and yet I knew I wasn't alone. I turned slowly. Shadows pooled in corners, deeper, darker than natural. I felt presence. Watching. Waiting. I moved on, stepping away from the door, feeling the night press against me. I didn't look back, but I could feel the building's memory trailing me, its shadows stretching beyond its walls. I realized then that leaving didn't mean escaping. The factory didn't release its secrets so easily. It had cataloged me, remembered me, and in some way it had begun to mark me. I walked into the street, flashlight still flickering, the smell of rust and decay clinging to my clothes. The city beyond felt unreal, too quiet, too still. I glanced back once. The factory sat there, silent, empty, or so it seemed. And yet I could feel it pulsing with life behind those rusted halls, its awareness stretching out, patient, waiting for my return. Morning never came in those halls, and I knew, somehow, that the darkness inside would follow me, long after I thought I had escaped. I stepped into the heart of the factory, and the air shifted immediately, colder now, heavier, carrying a metallic tang that stung my nose. The first machine I passed groaned softly, a low, wet sound that shouldn't have been possible. Its belts were frozen, rusted solid, yet it moved, just slightly, as if coaxed by unseen fingers. I froze, hand hovering over the railing. My breath came fast, shallow. How could it move? There was no power, no wind, no reason at all. The floor vibrated faintly beneath my boots. I leaned closer to a conveyor line, the rollers still coated in grime and sticky oil. A wheel turned, just a hair's width, grinding in protest, and then stopped. I blinked. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even breathed in that corner. But something had moved it. Something unseen, patient. I felt it behind me, pressing, a presence as heavy as the machinery itself. I walked slowly past the production floor. The larger machines loomed, iron skeletons of a time when they hummed with life, now frozen and grotesque in their rusted frames. My flashlight caught on sharp edges, bolts like jagged teeth, belts curled like dead snakes. And still in the faint shadows, the machinery whispered. Groans, clicks, dragging sounds that made my skin crawl. I told myself it was the building settling. Buildings make noises, machines settle, but the sounds didn't settle. They followed me. They imitated the rhythm of my steps, then deviated, creating an echo that was almost too perfect, too deliberate. I moved toward a large press at the far end, its mouth gaping, jaws open, frozen mid-crush. I shined my light along its frame. Deep scratches marred the metal, old and jagged, some fresh-looking, like something had clawed at it recently. My stomach tightened. I had the distinct sense that someone or something had been here, working silently in the dark long before I arrived. The echoes weren't random. They were records, memories replaying in shadows. A sudden creak overhead made me jump. I swung the flashlight up. Catwalks above, lattices of rusted steel, shifted slightly. One section sagged, a panel trembling as though it bore weight. I held my breath. Nothing should be moving there. The building was dead, lifeless. And yet it breathed around me, shifting, groaning, aware. I felt the eyes of the past on me, men and women who had toiled here, trapped in memory, their efforts still haunting the halls. I followed a line of small machines along the wall. Each wheel and lever trembled as I approached, groaning softly. I paused at one, brushing my fingers over the surface. The metal was ice cold, slick, yet it pulsed faintly under my touch like it had a heartbeat of its own. A whisper of movement behind me. I spun. Empty corridor, just shadows curling and twisting with the light. My pulse thundered in my ears. I could hear it echoing in the halls, mixing with the low groans of the machinery, creating a rhythm that wasn't natural. I continued deeper into the factory. Dust swirled in the flashlight beam, disturbed by my steps. I noticed the floor here was different, worn in places as if feet had pressed it into shape over decades. Some prints were small, delicate. Others were larger, heavier, human probably. But the shapes blurred, impossible to pin down. They were footprints in memory, lingering, refusing to leave. I felt eyes watching from the corners again, and for a moment I imagined the workers of old, still bending over their machines, still laboring in silence. A low hum began, almost imperceptible at first, vibrating in the concrete. Then it grew like a chorus of echoes combining, machinery resonating in unison. I stopped. The sound wasn't mechanical, not entirely. It carried something else, effort, exhaustion, the rhythm of lives spent bending to the will of steel and iron. I pressed forward, drawn by it, repelled by it. My boots scuffed over scattered debris, the sound harsh in contrast to the hum. Each step brought a new sensation. A faint draft, the scent of oil and sweat, a touch of something wet on my hand. I didn't remember touching anything wet. The conveyor belts ahead began to shudder lightly. Not violently, just enough for me to notice. I stepped closer, flashlight sweeping. A small crank turned, clicking in time with my pulse. I backed away slowly, heart hammering. The movement was deliberate. I hadn't triggered it. I hadn't even touched the panel. And yet there it was, alive in the faintest, strangest way. A line of lockers near the wall creaked, doors shifting slightly as if someone had brushed past them, even though the room was empty. I felt a sudden chill crawl along my spine. My gloves did little against it. The air seemed denser now, carrying the memories of the laborers, the sweat, the whispered curses, the soft hum of machines running in the dark. I realized then, the building had remembered them. Every motion, every groan, every echo I had heard was a trace of their lives, replaying endlessly. And somehow it wanted me to witness it. I moved toward the central press room. The floor here was uneven, cracked, leaking dark water from unseen pipes. I stepped carefully. My flashlight illuminated a line of cogs and wheels, each trembling in tiny, synchronized motions. I crouched, studying them. The metal was slick, sticky, and I realized something terrifying. The movements weren't random. They were choreographed. They repeated patterns, rhythms, patterns that hinted at hands that were long gone, still guiding the machinery. I heard a faint scraping behind me. My breath caught. I swung the flashlight wildly. Shadows leapt along the walls, distorted and impossible to track. And then I saw it, a small figure crouched behind a conveyor. Human-like, yes, but blurred as if the air itself had formed it. I blinked. Gone. The movement wasn't solid. It didn't occupy space like a normal person. It was memory, or something born from memory, drifting just beyond my perception. I stepped back, boots slipping slightly on oil-stained concrete. The figure, or whatever it had been, reappeared further down the hall, following, waiting, patient. I realized I wasn't just walking through a building. I was moving through the lives of everyone who had ever labored here. Their fatigue, their persistence, their despair had seeped into the walls, into the machinery, into the air itself. And now it pressed against me. I could feel it, faintly brushing, nudging, urging me onward. I reached a corner and paused, flashlight sweeping. The main press stood there, massive, iron jaws frozen mid-crush. I stepped closer, drawn despite my fear. A faint scratch echoed across the floor behind me. I didn't turn. My heartbeat filled the silence. The press shivered. A lever moved a fraction, slow, deliberate. I was no longer in control here. The factory was alive in memory, and it had begun to manipulate me. I moved through the room, careful, tracing the machinery with my light. Every cog, every wheel, every lever whispered the weight of labor long past. A faint metallic scent lingered heavier here, and I realized someone had bled here, not recently, long ago. But the memory remained. I shivered, recalling the faint smear I had seen in another corridor, the shape of something human pressed against cold steel. Was that real or just another echo? The line between memory and presence blurred. I followed the rhythm of the building, the echoes of machinery guiding me through corridors I didn't remember walking. It was hypnotic, mesmerizing, terrifying. I understood suddenly why people stayed away. Not because it was abandoned, because it remembered. It never forgot, and now it had noticed me. The far end of the hall opened into a storage bay. I stepped inside, boots scraping gravel and dust. Old crates lined the walls, machinery parts stacked carefully as if someone had arranged them yesterday. I noticed handprints in dust, small, large, adult, child, layered and overlapping. Someone had been meticulous here, or something had. The air felt heavier, as if the very room had weight. I swept my light over the crates. One moved, not toppled, not pushed, moved. Slowly, deliberately, as if unseen hands were arranging it. I stepped back, my mind raced, machines moving themselves, shadows shifting like living entities, footprints layered over footprints. The building was a memory, yes, but it was more. It was sentient in its remembrance. A hum began again, low, vibrating the floor beneath me. I pressed my hands to my ears. It was a chorus of echoes, of labor long past, of hands guiding, of voices whispering. I didn't want to hear it, yet I couldn't turn away. I moved toward the exit of the storage bay. The hallway stretched ahead, narrower now, darker, machinery looming close. My flashlight caught on a small lever. I didn't remember it being there. I reached out. The moment my fingers brushed it, the hum ceased. Silence. Absolute, heavy, suffocating. Then a soft, deliberate clack echoed behind me. Something or someone had just moved. I ran faster than I thought possible, weaving between machines, past shadows that seemed to bend toward me. I didn't look back. The sound followed me, faint, patient, echoing rhythmically, keeping pace with the memory of every worker who had ever lived here. I burst into the main hall again, heart hammering, chest tight. My flashlight flickered, then steadied. The machines groaned, soft now, almost contemplative, as if they were satisfied I had survived this far. I reached the exit door, gasping, fingers gripping the handle. I turned back once, sweeping the hall with my light. Everything lay still, frozen, silent. And yet I could feel it. The building remembering me, tracking me, folding me into its archive of labor and memory. I pushed the door open, stepping out into the night air, gulping it down, desperate to be free. The factory loomed behind me, massive, silent, yet alive with echoes. Every groan, every metallic whisper, every subtle movement was catalogued. And I knew deep down that the moment I had left its walls, the machinery had already begun replaying my steps, my fear, my heartbeat. My memory had been folded into its own, and somewhere in those rusted halls, something waited patient for the next visitor who thought the building was dead. I found the door half hidden behind a stack of crates and coils of wire, a dark slab of wood that hadn't looked important from the hall. But now, pressed against it, I felt its pull, the way the wood seemed almost to resist me. I reached for the handle, cold metal, solid. I turned it, locked. I frowned, glancing around. I could have sworn it had been open when I passed last night, swinging freely like it wanted to invite me in. But now it refused. I pressed my palm to the wood. The temperature dropped instantly. Frosted breath escaped my lips in little clouds. My fingers tingled. Why did it feel colder here than anywhere else? The hall behind me was silent, the groans of machines from earlier now distant echoes. Still, the air pressed against my skin differently, heavy, expectant. Something lingered beyond that door. I knew it. I could feel it waiting. I tested the handle again. No give. My heart thudded. I was drawn to it more than curiosity. It was as though the door itself was guarding a secret I was meant to find. I looked around the hallway. Rusted lockers, scattered tools, bits of machinery, everything coated in a fine layer of dust. And then I noticed it, a small coat hanging on a hook, frayed sleeves, frozen in place like the person had stepped away a moment ago and never returned. I froze, studying it. Nothing else was near it, yet the fabric shivered lightly just at the cuff. My pulse picked up. Was it movement or imagination? I couldn't be sure. I retraced my steps, flashlight scanning the walls. There were old photographs tacked in corners, black and white faces staring back at me. Men and women in worn overalls, smiles tight, eyes hollow. Names scratched into the margins, some faded, some sharp, freshly written. How could that be fresh? My skin crawled. The door, the locked workshop. It must hold more than tools. It held lives. I tried the handle again. Nothing. My frustration edged toward fear. I tapped the wood slowly, then harder. The sound echoed strangely, hollow and wet, almost like something inside was listening, shifting. A groan followed, low, metallic. Not a machine. Something inside the walls, my ears strained. Every shadow seemed to breathe with me. Every flicker of light from my flashlight cast movement where none existed. I stepped back and noticed the floor near the door was different. Scuff marks in the dust, fine scratches radiating outward. Human hands, maybe knees, dragged something across the concrete, or someone had done it, someone still doing it. I bent down to inspect. The dust pattern shifted beneath my fingers. I pulled back. Cold, almost sticky. It left me trembling. I hadn't touched anything. Then I noticed the faint smell. Soap, sweat, something floral, old and cloying. Like someone had been here cleaning, trying to keep a part of themselves alive in this decay. I coughed, wavering, drawn closer despite my fear. What was inside that workshop? What did it want to show me? Or who? I circled the door. Light from my flashlight caught on something small at its base, a key. Rusted, bent slightly, I picked it up. My hands were clammy. I tested it in the lock. It fit. Turned with a soft click. The air inside hit me first. Thick. Smell of damp fabric, rust, oil, and something faintly metallic, almost like blood but too faint to place. I shone the light into the room. Everything was arranged neatly, impossibly so. Desks lined one wall, tools hung in order, papers stacked meticulously. But there was something else, small personal items. Gloves, hats, notebooks, photographs. A worn pair of boots facing the wall. A child's drawing pinned above a desk. Someone had left or been taken, and yet it felt as though they'd only stepped away. I stepped in careful. The floorboards creaked under my weight. Shadows moved as I passed. I stopped at a desk, flashlight sweeping over it. The papers were ledgers, logs of work, names, times, notes. But some weren't logs, they were letters written to no one or to someone long gone. One opened on my lap as if waiting. The handwriting was small, tight, shaky. I hear them. They follow. They watch. My stomach twisted. I shivered. The words, they weren't old. Not entirely. I glanced around. The walls were lined with lockers, each with items left behind. A scarf, a pocket watch, a photograph, gloves, tools worn smooth by constant use. Every object vibrated with memory pressed into place by invisible hands. I felt eyes on me, dozens of them from behind the walls, the floor, the shadows. Someone, or many someones, had left pieces of themselves here, fragments of their lives frozen in time. A drawer creaked. I spun toward it, empty. I blinked. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. My breath fogged in front of me. I pressed forward, notebook in hand. Names on the pages caught me. Familiar, not just the factory, but the town, the past decades. Names of people who had disappeared. Notes about accidents, some tragic, some inexplicable. Patterns. I traced them, heart hammering. The room, this workshop, cataloged their lives, their deaths, their absence. Something moved behind me. I froze. A chair scraped softly across the floor, but no one was there. My pulse jumped. I swung the flashlight. Empty. Just the shadow of the chair stretched long on the wall, distorted, wavering. I backed away slowly, eyes scanning, ears straining. Every creak of wood, every whisper of air sounded deliberate, as if the room itself was breathing, watching me, deciding how much to reveal. I moved toward a cabinet. Drawers lined up, each labeled in faded ink. Tools, personal effects, notes, private. I opened one. Inside, a pair of gloves, worn smooth, stitched carefully with initials. A small photograph slipped from between them, faces of a family smiling, frozen in time. I felt my stomach twist. They had left traces of themselves here, left to be remembered. But remembered by whom? By the room? By me? A faint sound, a whisper, almost brushed my ear. I spun. Empty. My flashlight flickered briefly. Cold air swirled around my legs, carrying the faint scent of the floral soap again. I felt as though someone had passed behind me, brushing the fabric of my jacket, testing me, assessing if I belonged here. I swallowed hard, stepping back. The door slammed lightly behind me, not with wind, not with gravity. It had closed on its own. Panic clawed at my chest. I tried the handle, locked again. My heart thumped heavy and fast. I took a step back, scanning the room. The personal items now seemed to lean slightly toward me, just a little, as if curious, as if expecting me to do something. I swallowed. What was this room? A shrine? A trap? A memory made solid? I moved cautiously along the walls, flashlight sweeping over each item. A hat, a scarf, a pair of boots worn and polished, a child's drawing pinned above a tiny desk. The shapes shifted subtly when I wasn't looking directly. I blinked, focused. Still there, but slightly different, as though the room had breathed, rearranged itself while I looked away. Then I noticed something in the corner. A figure crouched low, human-shaped but impossibly thin, pale, watching. My heart jumped. I held the light steady. The figure did not move. And then slowly it dissolved into shadow, blending with the walls, leaving only a faint imprint on the dusty floor. My breath hitched. It hadn't fled. It had always been part of the room. Part of the memory pressed into every object, every shadow, every floorboard. I walked toward the exit. Every step felt weighted. The room seemed to hum faintly, a vibration in the air that tugged at my skin, my hair, my senses. I glanced back at the desks, the personal items, the photograph of the smiling family. They watched, they remembered, and they would not forget me. The key lay on the floor where I had dropped it. I picked it up, hands shaking, and tested the lock. It turned easily now, almost inviting. I swung the door open. Outside, the hallway looked the same, rusted, silent, mundane. But I could feel the room behind me, pulsing, cataloging, memorizing. I stepped into the hall. The door shut lightly on its own. I moved away, heartbeat gradually slowing. I glanced back once. The workshop was dark, silent, and yet I knew it was not empty. I could feel the lingering presence of those who had worked, lived, vanished there. Their memory clung to the air, to the walls, to me. I did not turn back again. Not yet. But deep down, I knew the workshop would follow me. The items, the photographs, the traces of human life left behind, they were patient. They waited for the next visitor, the next curious soul, to step inside and become part of the memory, part of the lingering presence. And I could still feel it now, under my skin, in my breath, faint as a whisper, persistent as a heartbeat. I didn't expect to find anything in the basement. It was a narrow, cluttered room behind a false wall, the kind you pass 100 times without ever noticing. Dust hung thick in the air, and the smell hit me first, a mixture of mildew, rust, and something faintly chemical. It made my eyes water. My flashlight beam cut through the haze, landing on stacks of old filing cabinets, yellowed folders spilling over like forgotten memories. I ran my fingers along the metal drawers, cold, stiff. Each one was labeled maintenance, incidents, reports. I pulled the first open. Papers fluttered weakly like they hadn't felt air in decades. I bent over, shoving aside a tangle of wires and broken pens. The top file was a police report dated years ago. The ink was faded, but the words jumped out anyway. Unexplained disappearance. No witnesses. No signs of forced entry. I swallowed hard. That alone would have been enough to make me pause, but then I saw the handwritten note in the margin. Small, cramped letters. He watches the halls, knows the names. My hand shook as I traced it. Who had written that, and why was it in an official report? I opened the next file. Maintenance logs. Dates, times, machinery reports. Everything mundane except for the occasional comment scrawled in the margins. Footsteps echo when no one is there. Machines run on their own at night. A shadow lingers near the crates. I paused. My flashlight swung slightly and I thought I saw the shadow move, but there was nothing there. My pulse quickened. The room was still but not silent. Somewhere, water dripped. Maybe the wind whispered through a crack, or maybe the notes were right. I picked up a folder marked incidents. Leafing through, I found repeated entries, accidents that didn't make sense. Workers missing from their stations, found hours later with no memory or not at all. Notes like, the hum is louder when they disappear. They didn't leave, they're still here. I felt my stomach twist. My own breath seemed loud. I leaned closer, trying to steady myself. Each paper told a story, each note a warning. But then I noticed something strange. Some pages had dates that didn't match the reports. Years later, notes written as if someone had been watching, cataloging the warehouse long after everyone else had left. A small envelope caught my eye, tucked into the corner of a folder. I pulled it out. Inside, a photograph, grainy black and white. A man standing in the middle of the hall, but his shadow, it didn't match him. Twisted, stretched, darker than it should have been. And behind him, faint shapes like people, frozen, watching. My fingers trembled as I dropped the photo back into the envelope. The air in the basement seemed heavier now. Dust motes drifted like tiny dancers catching the light. My flashlight flickered. I cursed under my breath. Was it the bulb or something else? A quiet sigh brushed against my ear. I spun around, empty. Just the cabinets, just the files. Yet the feeling of being watched didn't leave. I opened another drawer. This one was a mixed collection, scraps of paper, torn pages from notebooks, even a child's drawing. All of it from workers who had been here decades apart. Their names, their notes, their fears preserved like specimens. One note stood out. I saw him in the dark. He knows our names. He remembers everything. I froze. The basement suddenly felt smaller. Walls seemed closer. The stacks of files leaned slightly like they were bending toward me. My flashlight caught a scrap of paper pinned to the side of a cabinet. Another name, and another, each written in the same cramped hand. I didn't recognize them all, but something about the sequence unnerved me. A pattern. I reached for the top file in the next cabinet. It was labeled simply, Observations. The pages inside were meticulous, organized, but the content was anything but. Notes about sounds, groans, creaks, whispers. Observations about workers who stayed too long at night, who heard voices. Some entries were only a few words, follows silently, eyes in the shadows. Others were longer, rambling accounts of fear, confusion, and unease. A cold draft swept past me. I shivered. My flashlight flickered again. For a moment I thought I saw a figure at the end of the row, just a dark shape unmoving. I blinked. Gone. My heart pounded in my chest. The basement was too quiet, too still, too alive. I flipped through the rest of the observations. One entry stopped me cold. The files themselves remember. Don't read too long or they'll notice. My hands froze over the papers. I laughed nervously, trying to shake it off. The note was old, stupid, meant to scare someone, yet my pulse didn't slow. The words lingered, echoing in my mind. They'll notice. I set the folder down and leaned back. The room felt endless. Cabinets stretched into shadow, walls pressing in. Dust swirled around my legs. A soft scrape came from the far corner, nothing visible. I held my breath. Another scrape, and then silence. I forced myself to continue. There were more files, more notes, more scraps of fear preserved like trophies. I read accounts of strange occurrences. Doors opening and closing without cause, machinery starting on its own, whispers that answered when no one spoke. Each entry ended the same way. A note in the margin, always the same handwriting. Small, cramped, impossible to ignore. He knows who's here. I realized I was holding my flashlight with both hands. My arms ached, my back ached, but I couldn't stop reading. The notes drew me in, layer after layer, story after story. And the deeper I went, the heavier the air became, the darker the shadows, the colder the basement. It felt alive, watching, waiting. I came across a file that was different. Not an official report, not maintenance. It was a diary, leather-bound, pages yellowed but intact. The handwriting inside was neat, almost obsessive. The entries described the warehouse in minute detail, but something was off. The diary chronicled accidents, disappearances, and strange sounds, but the author didn't just observe. They seemed to communicate with whatever haunted the place. It listens. It waits. Names are remembered. I flipped the pages faster, heart thudding. Mentions of workers from the 1940s, 50s, 60s. Names I had seen in the police reports, in the accident logs. It was a record of people, catalogued, traced, observed. And sometimes the writer disappeared from the entries for weeks, only to return with notes about voices and shadows. I think it's learning. It knows my thoughts before I do. I dropped the diary back into the drawer. The basement was silent again, but the feeling of being followed lingered. I moved toward the far wall, running my hand along the metal surface. Another file cabinet, another stack of papers, and another note pinned carefully on the topmost folder. He remembers everything. Names, dates, movements. He's patient. I swallowed. The words felt alive, like a pulse beneath my fingertips. I stepped back. My flashlight flickered. I thought I saw movement in the corner again, just a shadow. But the shadow shifted subtly, as if aware of me. I could feel it, watching, cataloging. My chest tightened. The files were more than paper. They were memory, witnesses, recorders, and now I was part of it. I kept reading, flipping page after page, unable to stop. Reports of maintenance checks, notes from supervisors, handwritten warnings, all with the same chilling margin notes. I noticed patterns. Names reappearing, shadows moving in the same areas, repeated phrases. He waits. He knows. He remembers. A breeze, or maybe a whisper, brushed my neck. I spun around. Nothing, just the basement, just the files, just the dust. Yet I couldn't shake it. Every sound felt amplified, every creak a warning. I realized I had been holding my breath. I leaned against a cabinet, chest heaving. The flashlight illuminated a photo, pinned awkwardly to the side. A group of workers smiling, unaware. But the shadows behind them, longer than they should have been, distorted, almost reaching. My stomach twisted. The room itself was alive with memory, with observation. Every note, every scrap, every photograph, it remembered me. I pulled one last file from the cabinet. It was thin, almost overlooked. Labeled simply, Final Notes. Inside, the last entries of a worker who had vanished decades ago. The words were frantic. I see him. I hear him. He knows my name. I can't leave. He's patient, waiting. My hands shook. The air thickened. My flashlight flickered again, and I thought I felt a presence just behind me. I stepped back. The basement felt smaller, oppressive. The files, the cabinets, the dust, they weren't inert. They waited. They remembered. They knew. And now I did too. I set the last file down carefully, heart racing. I had to leave. As I turned, the faintest whisper brushed my ear. You'll be remembered too. I froze. Nothing was there. Only the cold, stale air. Only the basement. Only the files. Only the weight of every name, every note, every shadow pressing down. I left, but I could feel them, watching, cataloging, patient. And I knew deep down that one day I would return. Because the files, they waited, and they never forgot. I started with a map. The warehouse, the surrounding streets, the little cafes where the workers used to grab lunch. I traced lines from one point to another, connecting names from the dusty files I'd found. At first, it looked random, scattered, meaningless. But the more I connected, the more the lines formed shapes, subtle, crooked, a pattern. People had disappeared here. Not all at once, not in dramatic fashion, slowly, quietly, like they had simply walked into the walls and never stepped back out. Names I'd seen in police reports kept surfacing, always tied to the building, always disappearing without a trace. And every time I thought I understood it, the timeline twisted. Someone missing in the 1950s, another in the 1970s, then a string in the 1990s. Decades apart, yet somehow connected. I opened another folder. Inside, photos of workers posed casually in the halls. I studied their faces, trying to spot anything unusual. Nothing, just normal people, smiles, overalls, hands clenched around tools, but the background, some had shadows I didn't recognize. Shapes behind machines, curling around corners, almost human but wrong. I shook my head. My mind was filling in gaps. That had to be it. Then I noticed something else. The disappearances weren't random. They followed a sequence. First, the night shift, then the early morning crew. Someone always went missing after spending too long in the workshop, the section where the machinery hummed even when powered off. I could almost hear it now, the soft vibration underfoot, the whisper of metal groaning when no one touched it. I began to catalog the timeline. I scribbled names, dates, times, adding notes from the reports and the marginalia. A rhythm emerged, one that made the hair on my arms rise. The longer someone stayed in the building, the more likely they were to vanish. And each time the files recorded it with almost clinical detachment, yet a creeping unease threaded through the words. He waits. He remembers. They never leave. I stared at the wall, covered in strings and photos, and for a moment it felt like the building itself was watching me. Every missing person left a faint echo behind, like a footprint in dust. The air seemed thicker here, heavier. I rubbed my eyes. Could a building hold memory? Could it track people? The thought felt ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being measured, logged, observed. I opened another police report. It described a worker found wandering in the street at 3 a.m., soaked and disoriented. He didn't remember leaving the warehouse. Notes in the margin, they come back, but not entirely. Some part stays behind. My stomach churned. A part of them stayed. Where? With what? I moved to the next file. Maintenance logs. The machinery had patterns too. Odd spikes in activity at strange hours, logs that didn't match anyone being present. Notes like, conveyor belt runs when empty. Engines start at 2:17 a.m., though no one is on shift. It was subtle, almost statistical. But when combined with the disappearances, it became impossible to ignore. Something in the building responded to presence, learned routines, remembered. A photograph slipped out of the folder. A group of missing workers posed in the same corner of the workshop. I froze. Their shadows were all wrong, stretching across the floor, touching one another in ways that seemed deliberate, almost communicative. I backed up. My flashlight trembled. The air smelled of rust and decay, faintly sweet like copper and old blood. I shook my head. My imagination, that had to be it. I found a small notebook buried under the files. It belonged to a maintenance worker from the 1960s. His entries were meticulous, almost obsessive. Dates, times, oddities, but it ended abruptly. I see them. Behind the machines, waiting. They know my name. I can't leave. Don't look too long. That line made my hand freeze over the page. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I left the notebook open and walked to the far wall. A loose floorboard creaked under my weight. My flashlight flickered. Shadows shifted. My chest tightened. I felt watched, always watched. The disappearances weren't just events, they were warnings. Each name in the files was a caution, a marker. Someone who ignored it would join the sequence. I pulled another file from the cabinet. This one contained letters from families of the missing, desperate pleas for answers. Police responses were formulaic, dismissive. But in the margins, someone had scribbled warnings. He knows where they went. Names are remembered. Don't become part of the pattern. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Who was leaving these notes? And why did they sound alive? I took a step back. The room felt smaller now, oppressive. Each drawer, each file seemed to lean toward me, drawn by the weight of the secrets inside. I imagined the walls whispering, the cabinets creaking in anticipation. My flashlight flickered again, and for a moment I thought I saw the faintest movement in the corner. Nothing concrete, just a shadow that didn't belong. I cataloged another sequence of disappearances. One in 1982, a man named Clark. He vanished from the night shift. Another in 1995, a woman named Sienna. She was last seen near the old maintenance workshop. The files indicated faint traces of each person, shoes left behind, gloves, jackets, but no bodies, just absence. And the same note, they didn't leave. I sat on a crate, rubbing my temples. The timeline pressed on me. Patterns within patterns. The building itself was a recorder. Every missing person, every shadow, every whisper of machinery, it remembered. I could feel it cataloging me too, measuring my curiosity, my fear. I opened a folder marked witness statements. They were bizarre. Everyone described the same sensations. Footsteps when no one was there, whispers that answered questions they hadn't asked, shadows that lingered too long. Some even reported seeing people from past decades. Familiar faces in unfamiliar places, watching silently. I leaned back. My heart raced. Could memory extend beyond life? Could the building keep traces of everyone who had vanished? I found one last report. The handwriting in the margins was frantic. Do not stay. He knows you. He always knows. Names are remembered. You are next. I dropped the file. My flashlight beam shook. My breath came fast. I wasn't imagining the weight, the pressure, the sensation of being cataloged. The basement door rattled. My pulse jumped. I spun. Nothing. Only the cabinets, the dust, the files, and yet I could feel it like a presence just beyond the edge of vision. Waiting, patient, learning. The pattern was complete in a way I didn't want to understand. The disappearances weren't random. They followed rules I hadn't seen fully yet, and I didn't want to see them. I stepped back from the wall. Each file I'd opened felt like a tether connecting me to the sequence. Each name a ghost. I wanted to leave, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The timeline pressed down on me, tracing lines from the past into my present. I realized I was part of it now just by knowing. I could hear the faintest whisper behind me. Not words, just a vibration in the air, like someone walking lightly over metal. I spun, flashlight slicing through the gloom. Nothing. The shadows stretched in corners, leaning toward me, but no one was there. My skin prickled. The files, the building, the pattern, they were alive in a way that defied reason. I opened one last folder almost compulsively. Inside, a single note. We remember them. We wait for the next. The handwriting was identical to every other margin note, every warning scribbled over decades. And as I stared at it, I understood. This wasn't just a record. This wasn't just a timeline. This was a trap. Awareness was enough to draw attention. Knowledge was dangerous. I stepped back, my flashlight trembling. Dust swirled around my boots. The timeline of disappearances, the pattern was complete in a way I could feel pressing against me. And somewhere deep in the shadows, something waited, patient, silent, watching. I didn't stop to question it. I didn't try to rationalize it. I left the files behind, left the basement, but the feeling followed me. Names, dates, shadows, whispers. The pattern had marked me, and I knew deep down it wasn't finished. I found it by accident. The hallway stretched farther than I thought it could, narrowing as I went, walls lined with peeling paint and rusted conduits. My flashlight caught the edge of a door that didn't appear on any of the blueprints I'd studied. No label, no number, just a rectangle of metal, scuffed and half buried in shadow. I didn't want to touch it, but my curiosity pulled me closer, slower with every step. The handle was warm. Not the cold metal of the other doors, not the chill I expected from a building abandoned for decades. Warm, almost alive. I froze. Could a door remember? Could it respond to me? My hand hovered, fingers itching to push, yet hesitant. Something about this place insisted I wait, measured my breathing, noted my hesitation. When I finally turned the handle, the hinges protested softly, squealing like whispers. The door opened to a room that smelled of earth and old cloth. The air was heavier here, thick with dust that didn't settle, that seemed to float as if stirred by invisible hands. My flashlight caught shapes in the corner, boxes stacked in precise angles, tools laid out like they had been used yesterday. I stepped inside. Every footstep echoed differently, muffled, as if the floor itself had been treated with some unseen softness. The walls bore no markings, no signs of maintenance logs, nothing that would appear on a map. And yet everything was too orderly, too deliberate. Someone or something had been here. Recently. A chair, centered, facing the wall. On it a notebook open. The pages were blank except for faint indentations like someone had written then erased. I leaned closer. The impressions spelled names. My pulse quickened. Names I recognized. People who had vanished from the building. First letters, partial signatures, scrawled in a trembling hand. Someone had cataloged them, remembered them here in this unmarked room. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and fast. The shadows in the corners shifted slightly, responding to my presence. A subtle vibration ran through the floor like the thrum of machinery, but deeper, more deliberate. I swallowed. The room was alive, or someone or something. Inside it was. I had no idea which, and that uncertainty made every second stretch. There were no windows, yet I felt watch from outside. From inside, too. My flashlight beam flicked over a stack of crates, tools on top. A wrench, a hammer, gloves, all laid as if in mid-use, yet coated in the same fine dust that floated in the air. I touched the wrench. It was warm, just slightly like the door handle, as if the objects had been used moments before. My skin prickled. I moved toward a corner where faint scratches marked the concrete wall. Not deep, not violent, but intentional. Letters, shapes. I traced them with my finger. He waits. I jerked back. The words hadn't been there when I started moving the flashlight. I spun the beam around the room. Nothing else had changed, or had it. The shadows lengthened almost imperceptibly, and I caught the glimpse of a shape recoiling behind a stack of boxes. Not human. Not entirely. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the weight of attention, patient and silent, focused on me from angles I couldn't see. I realized that every time I took a step, the room adjusted. Shadows shifted, objects trembled faintly, the air pressed in tighter. It wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting, recording, learning. And I was on the page now, another entry in a timeline I could not yet read. The notebook called me back. I forced my shaking hands to touch it, flipping pages slowly. The indentations deepened as I moved. Names became partial sentences. Dates, locations, small notes stayed too long, never returned. Saw them behind the machines. Each impression made my stomach turn. Someone here had survived the attention, or survived long enough to document it, and whoever or whatever used this room had noticed. I backed away. The chair scraped softly on the floor, though I had not touched it. A whisper, barely audible, ran along the walls. Letters, partial words, like the air itself carried fragments of speech. Don't stay, remember. My flashlight flickered. I dropped to one knee to steady it. The shadows in the corners seemed to converge toward me, but never fully formed. Watching, patient. I wanted to flee, yet my curiosity had me rooted in place. A small trapdoor caught my eye near the back wall. I had never noticed it in the other rooms. It was almost flush, blended perfectly with the floor. I crouched, ran a finger over the edge. Warm, smooth. Someone had opened it recently. A faint metallic scent seeped from it. I pressed my ear to it. Nothing. Not even a sound of wind or movement. Yet I felt the vibration, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat beneath the concrete. I realized then that the room itself had a rhythm, a subtle pulse. Each second measured me, noted my reactions, cataloged my fear. The names in the notebook were alive here, carried in dust, in the warmth of objects, in the faint hum beneath the trapdoor. The pattern of disappearances, the cataloging, the unmarked spaces, they weren't anomalies. They were rules. Rules I could not yet break, not without being added to the list. I stepped back, shaking my head. My flashlight beam caught something on the ceiling. Scratches again, shallow. Arranged in circular patterns. Not random, not accidental. My stomach tightened. The ceiling itself had been touched, marked, documented in a language I could not yet understand. And then I felt it. A presence close, just beyond my peripheral vision. Waiting, watching, adjusting its attention with my own movement. I tried to breathe. The room seemed to breathe with me, expanding slightly when I inhaled, contracting as I exhaled. My heart raced, but my mind sharpened. If someone had used this room, then they had left traces. Small patterns, subtle indicators. I scanned the floor. Tiny scuff marks, faint indentations around the chair, pointing toward the back corner. I moved toward them, careful, deliberate, tracing each subtle line. The air smelled stronger here, iron, dust, faint decay. The trapdoor shifted slightly under my touch. I froze. My flashlight flickered again. A shadow moved quickly across the room, across the wall behind me. Too fast, too smooth to be natural. My pulse thundered. I wanted to step back, wanted to run, but my curiosity anchored me. I had to know what it was. I knelt and pressed the trapdoor open. A faint shaft of blackness stared back at me. No light, no sound, nothing but the faint heartbeat beneath the concrete, and yet I could feel eyes on me. The room had prepared itself. Every object, every scratch, every whisper of air was calibrated to observe, to note my presence. I understood then, this room wasn't merely abandoned. It had survived, it had remembered, and it waited for me to become part of its memory. I closed the trapdoor slowly, my hands trembling. Shadows still clung to corners, stretched across the walls, longer than any light should allow. My flashlight beam caught the notebook one last time. The indentations had changed. Names I hadn't seen before. My own initials. I blinked. The room had already begun cataloging me before I had truly understood its rules. I took a step back toward the door. The handle was warm again, inviting, almost coaxing me to leave, yet reluctant to let me go. I forced myself to pull it open. The hallway outside had not changed, but the air felt thinner, lighter, as if the room exhaled when I stepped out. I didn't look back. I walked fast, head down, aware that my steps were being measured even as I left. But the feeling followed me. Not in the hallway, not in the air around me, but inside my mind. Names, dates, patterns, whispers. I could feel the rhythm of the unmarked room pulsing beneath my skin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows leaning across corners, the notebook open with names shifting on its pages. I had not been alone in that room, and whatever had been there had noticed me. Later, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the warmth was residual, maybe the shadows were tricks of the flashlight. Maybe I had been projecting, but the names on the page haunted me. The room had remembered them, remembered me, and in some way it was still alive, waiting, patient, observant. I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I try to map the warehouse, I come back to that unmarked room. No doors on any blueprint, no labels, nothing official. And yet it exists, and someone or something uses it. And the more I think about it, the more I feel drawn back against every instinct. I keep the memory vivid, sharp, because forgetting seems dangerous. Because if I forget, if I ignore the pattern, the room might come for me in ways I cannot predict. The whispers, the shadows, the subtle warmth, these are the traces it leaves behind. And I am part of them now. I don't know what happens to the people who disappear. I don't know what that room wants or who maintains it. But I know it is patient. It is deliberate. And I know it is still waiting for the next name to be carved into its memory. I didn't want to go back, not really. But the hallway had a way of pulling me in, a subtle insistence I couldn't name. Each step echoed differently than the last, uneven tiles amplifying my unease. And then I saw it, faint lines on the wall, pale streaks of chalk that didn't belong to any maintenance notes I'd found before. Faded but deliberate. Someone or something had written here, left a mark. I crouched, squinting. The words were incomplete, broken sentences. He watches, don't look back. My stomach twisted. I couldn't remember anyone else being in this part of the warehouse. And yet the chalk seemed fresh in the air, almost moist to the touch. I reached out. Fingers grazed the letters and a faint tremor ran up my arm like the wall itself shivered. The shadows shifted around me. Subtle at first, a corner catching the beam of my flashlight, stretching it longer, darker. Then a flicker, almost movement at the edge of my vision. I spun, heart in my throat, but there was nothing. Just the words, more lines appearing as if I hadn't noticed them before. They never leave. They hear everything. I pressed my palm to the wall, tracing the chalk. Rough, almost granular, but the letters seemed to burn faintly under my skin. I pulled back, blinking, trying to shake the feeling that I was being measured. My footsteps echoed again, and I realized the sound didn't match my movement exactly. A fraction of a second delayed, like the building repeated me. mocking my presence. The hallway opened into a larger room. Broken machinery, toppled chairs, and scattered crates filled the space. Yet the walls here were covered. Messages in different handwriting, different chalk colors, layered over each other. Don't follow him. He is here. We tried to leave, but he wouldn't let us. I froze. Someone or something had been trying to communicate or warn or maybe record. A breeze or the illusion of one swept past me. The chalk lines quivered slightly as if alive. I bent closer, running my fingers along the streaks. Names, dates, partial sentences that hinted at fear, confusion, desperation. The more I read, the heavier the air felt. My flashlight flickered. Shadows stretched like fingers across the ceiling. I swallowed hard. I noticed a corner I hadn't seen before. The walls there were darker, streaked with older chalk. The words were nearly illegible, smudged, erased in part. He waits in the walls, in the floors, don't trust. The letters ended abruptly, the chalk dust flacking under my touch. A faint scratching sound came from behind the wall, rhythmic, soft, but deliberate. My pulse surged. I backed away, but curiosity anchored me. I needed to know what had been left behind. Stepping carefully, I followed the line of messages along the wall. Each message layered over the last, overlapping, creating a tapestry of fear. Partial drawings, stick figures with empty eyes, arrows pointing in impossible directions. I traced one and felt a tingle along my spine. The chalk wasn't just marking the wall. It was marking me, measuring how I reacted. A crate shifted slightly under my flashlight beam. I hadn't touched it. The shadows around it twisted. I could feel a presence, patient and silent, watching from somewhere between the walls. My hands shook as I continued reading. We didn't know the rules he notices. The words repeated in different forms, over and over like a mantra. A pattern forming, one I didn't fully understand yet. I knelt to examine a lower section of wall. A tiny message, almost invisible. Look closer. My flashlight flickered again, and I realized the dust on the floor had traces of movement, subtle scuff marks forming lines toward a door I hadn't noticed. I followed them cautiously. Each step seemed to pull the hallway slightly longer, stretching the space, bending it around me. The door at the end was partially hidden behind a stack of boxes. I brushed them aside. Cold metal. No label. I hesitated. The chalk markings seemed to stretch toward it, arrows drawn in desperate lines, messages I couldn't fully read. He is here. Not alone. My hands trembled on the handle. Warm, always alive. I opened the door slowly. Inside was a small office almost untouched. A desk with papers stacked neatly, tools arranged meticulously. But the walls were covered in messages again, overlapping, fatting into one another. We tried to leave. He follows footsteps. The walls remember. I felt that same pulse I had in the unmarked room, subtle but undeniable. The room was alive, observant, patient. I moved closer to the desk. A journal lay open, pages yellowed but legible. The handwriting was hurried, frantic, notes about the building, about someone or something, tracking movements. Names, dates, observations, sketches of shadows, distorted figures. I read, my heart hammering. We cannot leave. He notices fear. He records it. Every step, every glance, even the walls whisper our names. A faint scraping came from the ceiling. I froze. My flashlight trembled in my grip. Shadows elongated. I wanted to leave, but something compelled me to continue. The journal's next page had a single sentence underlined repeatedly. He cannot be ignored. I shivered. I had ignored it already, hadn't I? Coming here, reading the messages. I was part of it now. I examined the walls closer. Faded symbols, lines, letters erased or overwritten multiple times. I could almost make sense of them. A language built on fear, observation, warning. The scribbles seemed to react to me, shifting slightly when I moved my flashlight beam. The air thickened, pressing against my skin. I realized the building itself remembered, recorded, and perhaps even anticipated. I turned toward the corner where the messages were most dense. A faint outline in the dust on the floor formed a symbol, almost like a signature. I traced it with my finger. The scraping stopped abruptly. Silence. But then a whisper, barely audible, threaded along the walls. Why are you here? My pulse surged. I could feel eyes on me. Somewhere unseen, the building had noticed my intrusion. I tried to rationalize it. Chalk dust, shadows, nothing alive. Yet the warmth, the subtle vibrations, the faint whispers, they were real. I could feel them. Every message, every mark was a breadcrumb of trauma, warning, documentation. And I was following them deeper. The deeper I went, the more the building observed, measured, remembered. One wall bore a message in faint, almost erased chalk. We tried to help him, but he sees everything, he knows. I stared. Who was he? The writing shifted slightly as I watched, the letters trembling like breath on a mirror. My hands shook. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet my curiosity pressed me forward, deeper into the messages. I noticed small smudges on the floor, fingerprints, footprints, scuff marks. Someone had been here recently, not long ago. My stomach tightened. I had assumed the messages were old, relics of past trauma. But this suggested ongoing observation. Someone or something still used this place, still left signs, still watched. I moved toward a corner where the chalk was faintest. A message half erased, almost illegible, "Don't forget him." I felt it then, a presence just behind the wall, patient, silent, waiting. I spun, flashlight sweeping every angle. Empty. Yet the air pressed closer, cold but alive. I realized I wasn't just reading the messages. They were reading me, recording me, measuring my fear. I stepped back toward the door. Shadows followed, stretching along the walls. The faint scratching resumed, rhythmic and soft, as if acknowledging my presence. My flashlight flickered once more. Names appeared on the walls I hadn't noticed before, shifting faintly, morphing, almost alive. My own initials. My heart thundered. I opened the door. The hallway greeted me, unchanged but heavier somehow, thicker with awareness. Every step away from the office echoed, but the echo didn't match my pace exactly. The messages had marked me, threaded themselves into my memory. I couldn't leave completely. Not yet. Not without the knowledge pressing inside my mind. I paused mid-hallway. The air carried a faint whisper just at the edge of hearing. He notices, he waits. My pulse surged. I forced myself to keep walking. The hallway stretched slightly with each step. The building, alive in a way I didn't fully understand, had noticed my intrusion. I was catalogued, observed, measured. And yet I couldn't stop thinking about the messages. Names, warnings, symbols, chalk marks, all fragments of fear left behind by those who had been trapped, lost, or watched. I realized I wasn't merely uncovering history. I was entering it, becoming part of the record. The building remembered everything from past to present, and now, inevitably, me. Even now, as I step outside, the images linger. Names shift in my memory, whispers thread through my thoughts. I can feel the walls pressing in, the building observing, patient. The messages left behind were not just warnings, they were invitations, and I have accepted them. I called, and then I called again. Numbers I had scrawled from old records, handwritten logs, even the faded employee rosters from the warehouse. Every time it was the same. Silence. Click. Nothing. No greetings, no static, no background noise, just emptiness. At first I thought maybe the lines were dead. Maybe the people I sought had moved on, changed numbers, disappeared into normal lives. But then the thought twisted in my mind. How many of them really left? How many had stepped out one day and never returned? Every unanswered call felt like a reminder that the warehouse didn't just hold messages on its walls. It held stories that no one could finish, no one could close. I tried the security office next. An old number scribbled in a yellowed log. The line rang and then rang, stretching longer than I thought it could, but no one picked up. Nothing. My own voice sounded hollow in my ears when I tried leaving a message. "If you're there, I need to know, please." But it evaporated into silence, swallowed whole. I left messages on every voicemail I could find. People who had worked the night shifts, former maintenance staff, even the occasional manager whose signature I had traced in the old files. Nothing. Weeks had passed, but the silence persisted, unbroken. And yet the warehouse itself seemed to respond. My phone would buzz in empty rooms, vibrating faintly against my palm. Notifications would flash, calls I didn't receive, messages I never sent. One night I decided to drive by the warehouse again. Windows dark, doors locked, shadows pooling along the corners. No lights, no hum of machinery. But as I circled the building, I noticed the faintest flicker inside, a shadow moving across a second-floor window. I stopped. Headlights cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. Empty. Yet I knew I had seen it, knew it. My chest tightened. Someone had to be inside, someone or something. I went back the next day, walking the perimeter, knocking on doors I had unlocked before, peering through dusty glass panes. Nothing answered. Not the walls, not the floors, not the faint echoes I sometimes thought I heard. The warehouse held its secrets with patience, with an almost predatory calm. It knew I wanted answers. It knew I was desperate, and it enjoyed the wait. Late that evening, I tried calling again, a new number I had found through an old directory. A name I had stumbled upon in the maintenance logs, a Mr. Talbot. The line clicked, rang and rang. Longer this time. My stomach knotted. Then, just as I was about to hang up, a voice, barely audible, distorted like it was coming from beneath water, whispered something I couldn't catch. The line went dead immediately after. I slammed the phone down, chest pounding, hands slick with sweat. Sleep came in broken fragments that night. Dreams of the warehouse, doors opening where none existed, shadows shifting just beyond my vision. I woke several times to my phone vibrating silently, the screen blank, the contact names all gone. Even in my own apartment, I felt the presence of the building, the unanswered calls reaching me across the miles. Days later, I tracked down another former employee, or at least I thought I did. The number connected to a man who sounded like he had aged decades overnight. His voice was coarse, gravelly, strained. "You shouldn't call here," he said. Nobody answers because we don't." And then the line cut. No goodbye, no warning, just nothing. The phrase lingered, "we don't." I tried to process it logically. Maybe he had lost his memory, maybe he had become paranoid, maybe the warehouse had done something to him. I couldn't be sure. I couldn't stop thinking about it, though. Every unanswered call, every dead line, every voicemail that disappeared without trace, pieces of a puzzle I was increasingly terrified to finish. At one point, I even tried the old security company, a company that had long since gone bankrupt, taken over by another. Emails bounced, phone lines disconnected, all records vanished. Every attempt to reach someone tangible met only with silence. It was as if the people had evaporated, leaving behind only their connection to the building. I started to notice patterns in the silence. Calls I made at night seemed to draw more echoes, more subtle responses from the building itself. Phones would vibrate in my pocket, displaying numbers I hadn't dialed, sometimes names I recognized from faded files. I tried answering. No one spoke. But sometimes a faint hiss, a soft scrape, a whisper of breath that didn't belong to me. It began to affect me. My days blurred into nights. I would hear my phone ring in empty rooms. Even in cafes, on streets, the vibrations would come, brief, insistent, disappearing the moment I reached for it. The warehouse had followed me somehow, reaching out through lines and numbers, leaving me with nothing but the echo of voices that refused to answer. One evening, I found a message left on my voicemail that I didn't remember receiving. No number, no name, just a whisper, clear but distant. "They are gone, but not gone." I played it again and again, chilled me to my core. I tried calling back, nothing. The line was dead. Every logical explanation collapsed under the weight of the whisper. Someone had left it for me, or something. I began leaving my own messages, reaching out even knowing no one would respond. I tried to speak to ghosts through the phone lines, reciting names, dates, snippets of conversations from the old files. Sometimes, just sometimes, I thought I heard faint breathing on the other end, faint taps, almost rhythmic. I would slam the phone down, heart racing. But the faint hope that someone somewhere would answer, kept me trying. Weeks passed. Calls to Talbot's name produced nothing. Others, numbers, disconnected or silent. I realized the warehouse's influence wasn't limited to the physical building. It had stretched outward, claiming silence, erasing responses, emptying lines of life. My persistence felt foolish, almost dangerous, but I couldn't stop. I needed the answers more than I needed sleep, more than I needed sanity. One day, a local historian mentioned the building in passing, said there were rumors, vague and untraceable, of a night shift where no one returned, a security log that disappeared, a series of abandoned phones with messages that went unanswered. I asked for details. He shook his head. "No one answers," he said, almost casually. And then he walked away, leaving the phrase hanging like a curse in the air. No one answers. The more I investigated, the more it became clear. No one had answers. Former employees, maintenance staff, security, either gone or silenced, records lost or destroyed. And the few who remained never spoke. Calls, letters, emails, all met only with silence. It wasn't coincidence. The warehouse had claimed it, collected it, and turned it into its own quiet archive. I realized that the unanswered calls weren't absence. They were communication, but not in a way I understood. They weren't meant to answer me. They were meant to observe me, mark me, measure my persistence, my fear. Every unanswered voicemail, every dead line, every ghost of a voice on the other end. The building was cataloging my reaction, just as it had done with everyone before me. The isolation weighed heavier with each day. Friends stopped answering my calls, too. Emails went ignored. Even the world outside seemed to adopt the warehouse's silence. I began to imagine that the building extended beyond its walls, reaching invisibly into the lines of connection, turning life itself into echoes that could not respond. I found myself standing in the empty office once again, the one with messages scrawled on every surface. I dialed a number at random just to hear the click in silence. My pulse thumped with a mix of dread and anticipation. And then, just as I pressed the phone to my ear, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. You hear them, but they hear you. I dropped the phone. The line went dead. My hands shook. And yet I felt an odd clarity. I understood in a chilling way that the warehouse's unanswered calls were not failures of communication. They were a system, a record, a living silence that spanned time and space. Every missed call, every disconnected line, every void of voice. It was an echo of what had been, and a warning of what could be if I lingered too long. I left the building that night, but not completely. My phone, my mind, my shadow, all carried a piece of it. The unanswered calls followed me, the silence persistent, patient, observant. I knew that someday, somewhere, the warehouse would call again. And when it did, I would answer. Because the unanswered calls weren't just silence, they were invitations. And I had already accepted. The ladder groaned beneath my hands. Every rung felt older than it should have, every bolt loose enough to make me question whether it would hold my weight. I kept going, though. I had to see it from above. The warehouse had swallowed enough days, enough people, enough stories from the ground. Maybe from the roof I could finally understand something. The wind hit first, sharp and sudden, whipping against my face as I pushed onto the flat rooftop. Concrete and rusted metal stretched in every direction. The city beyond was blurred, a haze of yellow lights and distant traffic hums, but here on this roof, the warehouse itself dominated everything. Shadows clung to the edges of the building, dark and patient. The air smelled like dust and oil, and something else I couldn't name, something older. From up here I could hear it, not just the wind. Faint, uneven noises, echoes from below, metal scraping, soft thumps, the occasional hollow cough of air through pipes. At first I thought it was the building settling, old steel complaining, but the rhythms were too deliberate, almost human. Someone was moving down there, or had been moving. I couldn't tell how long. I edged closer to the roof's parapet, leaning over just enough to see. The yard below was empty, littered with crates and machinery left to rust. Yet the sounds persisted. I held my breath, trying to pinpoint the origin. A shadow flickered across a far doorway. Just for a second, gone before I could even focus. My heart kicked, not with fear exactly, but with the need to know who or what was down there. The roof offered little safety. No walls, just the thin rim of concrete and the vast drop beyond. I imagined myself slipping, falling, joining the silence I was beginning to feel seep from the building itself. My hand gripped the edge tighter. Even the wind seemed to shift against me, a soft push like warning me away. I shook it off. If the warehouse wanted me to fear, it would get more than that. I started walking along the roof's length. Every step sent gravel skittering across the surface. The noises below responded, subtle shifts in rhythm, as though the building itself listened. I froze. The scraping stopped. Then a low, metallic ping from deep within the structure. Echoes bounced against the walls, and I could swear a whisper followed, barely audible. Up here. The rooftop had vents, skylights, old exhaust pipes, all rusting and crooked. I peered through one skylight, careful not to break the brittle glass. Inside, machinery stood silent, coated in dust, but shadows moved differently here. A crate shifted as if someone had leaned against it. Another sound, sharper this time, a dragging of metal across concrete. I stepped back from the glass, heart thundering. Someone was down there, but the floor was empty. I thought about calling out, but the wind stole my voice before it left my lips. Even shouting might have been futile. I was separated from whatever was below by a solid roof and walls, yet the sounds kept echoing, teasing me, leading me along the edges. I realized then that the building didn't just contain space, it contained attention. It noticed. I was aware of every shadow, every sound, and I could feel the warehouse noticing me right back. A section of the roof's railing was bent inward. I hadn't seen it on the climb up. Curious, I approached. Rusted steel, old but pliable, pushed easily under my weight. I imagined the stories this railing could tell, the accidents, the shortcuts, the hands that had pressed against it before me. I ran my fingers along the jagged edge and felt a small scrap of cloth caught in the bend. Faded red, stiffened with age. A worker's uniform, a bag. I couldn't tell, and the building didn't offer clarity, only questions. The sounds below shifted again. Louder now, more distinct, a scraping, a soft sigh, almost like someone dragging a body, but rhythmical, purposeful. I crouched, trying to locate the source. The yard appeared empty from my vantage, but the echoes of movement told a different story. I felt it in my chest, a rising panic that was more curiosity than fear. I needed to know who was down there, even as part of me wanted to turn and leave. I crouched behind a rooftop unit, a small HVAC box long abandoned, and observed the edges of the roof. Far across, a skylight rattled. Not from wind, something moved beneath it. A shadow passed, something tall, thin, but wrong. Limbs moved in angles that shouldn't have been human. I blinked. The shadow vanished. I strained my ears, but the sound was gone. Silence. Only the building, breathing, waiting. A sudden gust lifted loose gravel, clattering across the roof like gunfire. My heart jumped. The sound below shifted, mirroring the noise above in a way that made my skin crawl. The echoes weren't random. The warehouse had memory, rhythm, awareness. It mirrored me, responded to me. Every step I took, every breath I drew was cataloged. I realized then that I wasn't observing the building. It was observing me. I took a few cautious steps toward the stairwell hatch. It would take me back down, closer to the origin of the noises. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my curiosity pulled me forward. Before I could open the hatch, a faint tapping began on the roof behind me. Light, irregular, like fingernails on metal. I spun around. Nothing, just wind, maybe, or the building testing me. I froze, counting the taps. 5, 7, 9. No rhythm I recognized. Just enough to unsettle me, to make me question what was real. Leaning against the parapet, I looked out at the yard again. Faint shapes shimmered in the dust, shifting as if seen from the corner of your eye. I couldn't tell if it was wind, heat, or some trick of my mind. And yet I could hear them, or it. Footsteps that didn't belong, whispers that dissolved before I could understand. The warehouse was alive in its own way, not in movement, but in memory, in sound, in presence. A skylight nearby rattled violently, startling me. I crouched, staring down at the floor through the fractured glass. Nothing. Then I noticed it, small marks on the concrete below, faint scratches in patterns like someone had walked a precise route across the yard for years. Repeated, layered, a map of movement. Patterns I couldn't decode from this height, but patterns that screamed of method, of presence. I realized that being on the roof offered clarity and confusion at the same time. I could see everything, yet I understood nothing. The sounds, the shadows, the echoes, they were all connected. The warehouse kept track, kept rhythm, kept secrets. And from above, I could see the vastness of its silence, the way it waited, patient, for someone to intrude again. I sat on the roof's edge for hours, listening. The wind rose and fell, carrying distant city noises that clashed with the building's internal rhythm. Faint groans of steel, taps on concrete, whispers that dissolved before recognition. I thought of the workers I had seen in the files, of the voices I could never reach, of the messages scrawled on walls I hadn't yet seen. The building wasn't empty. It never had been. Night fell, city lights bleeding into the horizon. From above, the warehouse appeared quiet, inert, yet every small noise felt purposeful, deliberate. A loose panel shifted, echoing like a door opening. I leaned forward, straining, heart hammering. Something or someone moved just out of sight. I couldn't see it, couldn't understand it, but I felt its awareness. I stayed until the moon rose fully, casting pale light across the metal and concrete. Every shadow seemed alive, every echo deliberate. The building kept secrets, yes, but also records. Every step I took was noted, mirrored, remembered. The rooftop offered a vantage point, yes, but also a trap. I was outside, yet part of the warehouse's pattern now, part of its observation. Finally, I climbed back down the ladder, slow and careful. The sounds below shifted again, as if acknowledging my movement. Nothing chased me, nothing spoke, yet I felt their presence more strongly than ever. The warehouse was patient. It waited, and I had left my mark in its memory. As I reached the ground, I realized I hadn't answered my first question. What or who was really moving below? But a faint tap against the wall, irregular like a heartbeat, reminded me that the answer wasn't gone. It was waiting, and I would have to return to hear it. I started noticing the reflections first. At first, I told myself it was just light bouncing off the glass, the city behind me catching in the warehouse windows. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized the reflections weren't random. Shapes moved behind the panes, shapes that didn't belong. Sometimes it was a flicker, a shadow at the edge of my vision, gone before I could blink. Sometimes it was a full form, tall and still, staring back. I walked closer, careful not to let the gravel under my boots give me away. Every window on the side of the building seemed to hold a pair of eyes. Not real eyes, I reminded myself, just the mirrors of my imagination playing tricks. But when I glanced away and then back, the shapes had shifted. The reflections were wrong, too deliberate, too intentional. Some windows were cracked, fractured lines running through the glass like veins. I leaned in, brushing my fingers over the jagged edges, expecting dust or grime. Instead, I felt warmth. Not heat from the sun. It was subtle, as if the building itself exhaled, as if someone or something was just behind the glass, waiting, watching. I stepped back. My pulse was loud in my ears. The sounds I had heard from the roof earlier seemed to follow me down here. Soft thumps, scraping, the hiss of air through broken pipes. And now, windows reflecting movement. I couldn't shake the feeling that every action I took was catalogued, mirrored, recorded. A faint tap echoed against a nearby pane. Light, soft, irregular, I froze, head tilted. My reflection stared back, but something else was there too. A shadow in the corner, fleeting, too angular to be human. I blinked. Nothing. The tap came again, more insistent this time. A rhythm forming, almost like a code. My name, a warning. I didn't know. I didn't dare speak it aloud. I circled the building, eyes scanning each window. Some were opaque with grime, others black, reflective like mirrors. In a few I thought I saw figures moving, but when I adjusted my angle, the space behind the glass was empty. Or so it appeared. The reflections were alive, shifting, not merely showing the building's interior, but suggesting presence, awareness. One window, higher up, caught my attention. It was cleaner than the others, unusually clear. I climbed a nearby fire escape to get closer. Every step on the metal stairs rang sharp in the emptiness, and the building seemed to respond. A faint scraping below, then silence. I reached the top, heart hammering, and leaned toward the glass. Inside, the room was barren. Dust motes floated in a shaft of sunlight. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. And yet in the reflection I saw it, a face, pale, sharp, pressed close to the window, staring at me. The eyes were hollow, endless, and for a split second I felt everything stop. My legs froze, my fingers clenched the railing. Then it vanished. Nothing in the room, just me, just the echo of a stare. I forced myself to breathe. Wind rattled a nearby pipe. The sunlight shifted. I looked again, reflections normal. My heart slowly returned to rhythm. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe the building had a way of preying on your mind. But when I glanced at a lower window across the courtyard, movement caught my eye. A hand, pale and slender, tapped against the glass. Then another, and another, but no one was there. The reflections were wrong, impossible. Shadows fell where no objects existed. I stepped closer, gripping a railing for support, and saw the faintest outline of a face behind the glass. Watching, waiting. Every time I moved, the reflection shifted, maintaining an impossible angle as though it followed me. The windows weren't just reflective, they were communicative. A pattern emerged: tap, pause, tap, shift. Sometimes the windows seemed to anticipate my movements. Sometimes they mirrored them with subtle delays. I felt a strange dizziness, as if the building and I were entwined in some silent choreography. Each step I took measured and recorded. I backed away, brushing a hand against the side wall. The building's bricks were cold, damp. I tried to reassure myself. The reflections were tricks, shadows, imagination. But the cold metal under my hand pulsed briefly, a vibration I felt in my bones. A warning or a greeting, I couldn't tell. Windows higher up rattled suddenly. I looked up. No wind, nothing should have caused that. Yet the glass quivered and faint shapes flickered behind it. Limbs bent in impossible ways. Faces formed, then dissolved. I swallowed hard, nausea rising. The warehouse was alive in its own way, I realized, not with motion but with awareness. It knew I was here. It had known I would come. I stepped back to the courtyard, scanning all angles. Across the far side, a series of windows reflected each other, and in the center a figure emerged. Human but wrong. Thin, elongated head tilting at an unnatural angle. It didn't move toward me. It didn't retreat. It simply observed, mirrored in dozens of windows at once, multiplying endlessly. I blinked. It vanished in one pane, only to appear in another. The warehouse itself seemed to fold reality around it. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't cooperate. I was tethered by curiosity and fear both. Every step I took revealed more anomalies. Shadows that should not exist, light bending in odd ways, windows that reflected not the exterior but what the building wanted me to see. I realized I could not trust my eyes. The building dictated the reflections, the shadows, the shapes. I was trapped in its perspective as much as I observed it. Then a sound, soft, deliberate, echoed from a broken window above. A voice, barely more than a whisper. "You're here." I spun, searching. Nothing. But the words lingered, carried on a draft. The wind had no voice, the city had no voice. Only the building, only the windows. I shivered, realizing that the reflections were messages, warnings, invitations. I didn't know which. I circled back toward the main entrance. Every step brought new anomalies. A window reflected a man I didn't recognize, standing behind me in perfect mimicry. Another showed a figure crouched, pressing a hand to the glass, tilting its head like it understood. I wanted to call out, but my voice was swallowed by the emptiness, the distance. No echo returned, only the observation. By now, the building's windows had become a labyrinth of mirrors, each pane showing possibilities, distortions, truths I couldn't parse. My mind ached with the effort to comprehend. I thought about leaving, but each reflection held me. I could see glimpses of corridors, stairwells, rooms behind rooms, each filled with shadows, each reflecting the wrong things. And always, always eyes, watching, waiting. I stopped at a row of ground-level windows. One reflected the fire escape I had climbed. Another reflected me perfectly, yet subtly wrong. My reflection blinked too late. I froze. For a heartbeat, I saw myself move without permission. Then it corrected itself. I staggered back. The windows weren't just watching. They were interacting. They were alive. A sudden tap, sharp and close. I whirled. No one there. But the tapping continued, coming from every window in sequence. I counted them, trying to make sense. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. Patterns forming, dissolving. Communication or mockery. I didn't know. I felt my sanity fray just enough to wonder if I was part of the pattern now. Another reflection in the warehouse's endless observation. I glanced at the topmost windows, the ones I couldn't reach. Movement flickered again. Faces, limbs, shifting forms. I realized the building had more stories than I had imagined. Windows that contained realities I couldn't access, but that somehow accessed me. Every reflection a potential observer, every shadow a presence. I felt small, exposed, part of an experiment I didn't understand. As night fell, the reflections multiplied. Shadows extended and warped with the dying light. I saw shapes behind panes that didn't correspond to rooms I knew existed. Windows became portals for imagination, memory, and perhaps something else. The building wasn't silent anymore. It whispered in reflections, in shadows, in the impossible angles of light. I felt it watching me as much as I watched it. Finally, I stepped away. The courtyard stretched before me, silent. Yet every window still reflected motion. Eyes that weren't mine followed. Shapes that shouldn't exist flickered in and out. I realized I would never see the warehouse the same way again. Every pane, every reflection, a lingering presence, a reminder that someone or something was always observing. I left that night with a strange relief. At least I had survived. At least I had returned. But a faint reflection in a top window caught my eye as I walked away. A figure, tall and thin, head tilted, watching. And then it blinked. I didn't. I saw it first in the distance, a figure moving across the far end of the warehouse lot. At first I thought it was a worker, or someone like me, wandering too close to the empty buildings. But the way it moved was wrong. Too smooth, almost gliding like it barely touched the ground. I froze, heart beating against my ribs, unsure whether to call out or stay silent. The air was thick, heavy with dust and the faint metallic tang of rusting machinery. The figure paused just beyond the chain-link fence. Its head tilted, and for a moment I swore it was looking right at me. Not through me, not past me, but directly at me. My breath caught in my throat and I realized I couldn't move. Every instinct told me to run, but curiosity held me fast. Who or what was this? Why had it appeared now after all the empty windows, the reflections, the shadows that shouldn't have existed? I squinted, trying to make out details. The light was fading, dusk curling around the edges of the warehouse, stretching long shadows across the cracked concrete. The figure's outline was thin, impossibly so, and yet it radiated a weight, a presence. Its movements were deliberate, purposeful. But then, without warning, it vanished. No step, no turn, no signal, just gone. One moment it was there, the next, the space was empty, and the air felt colder for its absence. I shook my head, thinking I must be tired, that exhaustion and tension were playing tricks on me. But a faint sound, like fabric brushing against metal, made me freeze again. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of a footstep, or something that imitated it, followed. I couldn't tell if it belonged to the figure or if it had been me imagining it. I had the oddest sensation that the warehouse itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. I took a step forward, gravel crunching under my boots, and suddenly the figure reappeared. Closer this time, but still impossible to reach. Every time I tried to move toward it, it shifted just out of range, always maintaining that unnerving eye contact. I felt watched in a way that made my skin crawl, the kind of observation that doesn't merely see you, but knows you. And the windows behind me reflected nothing, blank panes that should have mirrored me but instead absorbed the light like holes. I circled a rusting container, trying to flank it. The figure responded, moving in perfect counterpoint. It wasn't running or hiding, it was studying me. There was no aggression, but the weight of its gaze pressed against me like a physical force. I realized then that I wasn't pursuing it. It was allowing me to chase it, to wander, to draw myself deeper into its design. A sudden breeze whispered across the lot, stirring scraps of paper and debris. I heard the faint clatter of something metal behind me. My pulse spiked. Every instinct screamed to turn to look, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the figure. It was a test, I knew, though I didn't understand the rules. One misstep and what? I shivered, letting the dread coil around me like a living thing. The figure paused near a stack of pallets. Its shape blurred, bending light strangely, and I realized it wasn't just the shadows. It was altering reality in subtle, impossible ways. Pallets that should have blocked it seemed to vanish from my perspective. I stepped closer, compelled, terrified, feeling like a moth drawn to flame. And then it crouched slightly, tilting its head as if acknowledging me, inviting me into some silent game I didn't want to play but couldn't stop. I thought of the windows again, the reflections from before. Maybe it had been there all along, mirrored in every pane, feeding off my attention. The thought made my stomach twist. I tried to imagine the warehouse empty, but my mind refused. Every corner, every shadow seemed charged with presence, waiting. I realized that leaving wouldn't end it. Even now, with the figure gone, it was still here in the way the evening felt thick and alive, in the way the air seemed to pulse with anticipation. I moved toward a series of old office trailers at the far edge of the lot, thinking to put some distance between us. But the moment I did, I caught a glimpse of it in a shattered window pane. It wasn't looking through the glass, it was reflective, yet the reflection moved independently. It mimicked me with a delay, then tilted its head, unblinking. A cold, inexplicable fear took hold. I had encountered its presence before in the windows, in shadows, but now it was different, personal, targeted. I stopped, gripping the edge of a trailer, trying to steady my racing thoughts. The figure didn't advance, didn't retreat. It simply observed, patient, almost serene. I could sense it measuring, weighing, understanding me in ways I could not comprehend. My mind resisted the pull of logic. How could something so wrong exist in a world governed by physics and light and sound? And yet, there it was. I forced a deep breath, convincing myself I could walk past it. That movement was my ally. I took a slow step. The figure shifted fractionally, mirroring me again, each motion perfectly matched. It wasn't stalking me, it was synchronizing. I felt a strange vertigo, as if gravity had altered, as if I and the figure were the same, connected by some invisible thread of observation. Panic tried to rise, but I held it down, telling myself to stay focused. Then, as if testing the boundaries of reality further, it vanished again. Not behind cover, not into the shadows. It simply ceased to exist in that moment, leaving only the faintest distortion in the air, like heat wavering over asphalt. My heart thundered in my chest. Was this real or a trick of exhaustion and fear? My senses screamed, telling me it had not gone. It was watching, waiting, always aware, just unseen. A scraping sound caught my attention. Behind the trailers, a faint glow reflected off a metal surface. I crept closer, each footstep deliberate. Something had shifted there, a palette of shapes and lights that suggested motion, but not from anything human. A shadow separated from the others, elongating, twisting slightly. My pulse jumped. I wanted to call out, to demand answers, but my voice lodged in my throat. Then it appeared again, just at the edge of my vision. I turned fully. Nothing. Only shadows, only the whisper of air and the distant hum of the city. And yet I felt it, a presence that occupied space even when unseen. My mind struggled to process it. The figure wasn't bound by distance or line of sight or even time in the conventional sense. Every disappearance left a trace of awareness behind, an echo in the environment, a suggestion that it had been there and would be again. I stepped into the open lot, forcing myself to confront the emptiness. But the emptiness was alive. Shadows pooled in odd corners. Light bent unnaturally along broken edges of the concrete. I realized with a jolt that the figure wasn't just a being. It was a function of the space, an inhabitant of perception itself. Every corner I examined, every distance I measured, only confirmed its existence in ways I could not fully grasp. The sun had dipped below the horizon by now. Twilight bled into darkness and the figure remained, or at least the idea of it did. In the blackness, I could feel shapes moving in my periphery, fleeting, impossible to catch directly. My pulse slowed, but only slightly. The warehouse was quiet in conventional terms, but charged with potentiality. Something waited, something that didn't need to speak or move in ways I could detect. I thought about retreating, about leaving this lot entirely, but every instinct told me that distance would not matter. It wasn't in the warehouse exactly. It was in the perception of it, in the way I measured space, in the way my mind tried to account for its presence. I realized then that the chase was meaningless. I could never reach it, and yet I could never escape it. I crouched behind a rusted container, trying to breathe steadily. The figure appeared once more, far away, silhouetted against the remaining light in the sky. And for a moment I caught the sense of attention, the observation. It lingered there still, just long enough to imprint itself on my mind, then melted into the night. No movement, no sound, only presence. I wanted to convince myself that it was gone, but as I moved toward my car at the edge of the lot, I noticed details that unsettled me more than its visibility ever could. Shadows aligned unnaturally, patches of light bent as if watching, and a faint reflection in a window hinted at its form, even though nothing stood there. Every glance reinforced the inescapable truth. I had been observed. I would be observed. And the questions it left behind, the why, the purpose, the method, remained unanswered. By the time I reached the street, I was shaking. My legs trembled, my chest ached from tension. I glanced back. The warehouse stood silent, ordinary in every outward sense, but I knew better. Somewhere inside, or perhaps everywhere around it, the figure remained. Not lurking, not hiding, not sleeping. Waiting, watching, observing. And I knew with a sinking certainty that my understanding of space, of observation, of reality itself had shifted. I had glimpsed something that obeyed no rules I knew, and the knowledge would not leave me. Not tonight, not tomorrow. I would carry it with me, a lingering weight, a shadow in every reflection, a presence behind every window. As I drove away, headlights cutting through the dark, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The lot seemed empty, the figure nowhere, and yet every instinct screamed that it had never left. It never would. I didn't look away. The first thing I noticed was the air itself. It had changed, though I couldn't tell whether it was the hour or something in the warehouse. A subtle weight pressed against my chest, the kind you only feel when a place remembers you. I stepped through the cracked gates, boots crunching against gravel, and the setting sun cast long, orange shadows across the lot. It should have looked ordinary, empty buildings, rusting containers, broken windows, but it didn't. There was a pulse here, quiet, almost imperceptible, as if the walls themselves were holding a secret. I moved slowly, letting my eyes sweep across familiar shapes. The shadows in the corners of the lot stretched differently now. The light bent around the pallets and trailers in ways I hadn't noticed before. Something was off. I couldn't name it, but my stomach churned, a low knot of unease tightening with every step. It wasn't fear yet, not exactly, but a warning. I thought back to my last visit, the way the air had seemed thinner, the echoes sharper, the silence almost sentient, and now it felt thicker, waiting. I paused near the main warehouse doors, the paint peeling in long strips, exposing gray concrete beneath. A faint metallic tang hung in the air, rust and decay, and something else, something sweeter, almost like overripe fruit, faint but distinct. I tilted my head, trying to locate it. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound, and yet the smell persisted, curling around me like smoke from a fire that wasn't there. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight in my chest grow. Was it my imagination, a trick of memory? I wanted to believe so, but my gut told me otherwise. The windows along the side reflected the fading sun, streaks of gold and pink, but in some panes I thought I saw movement, just a flicker like a shadow passing behind the glass. I shook my head, trying to laugh it off, telling myself I'd been working too hard, thinking too much. But then one pane, the third from the corner, caught my attention. Something lingered in the reflection. Not me, not anyone I recognized, just a presence that felt aware. My pulse spiked and I stepped closer. Nothing. The glass was empty, yet I could feel it watching, a subtle pressure at the back of my mind, a knowing. I moved past the windows, keeping my steps quiet, almost ritualistic. Gravel, concrete, the occasional rustle of paper in the wind. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow deeper than it should be. I noticed the tilt of a broken pallet, the way a trailer door sagged slightly, and a thought came over me. Had it always been like this? I remembered my first visits, the emptiness, the silence, the casual disrepair. But tonight everything seemed deliberate, arranged, waiting. I paused at the edge of the loading dock, peering into the shadowed interior of the warehouse. The door hung open, groaning softly as it shifted in the breeze. Inside, darkness pooled in the corners, swallowing the beams of fading light. I couldn't see much, but I could feel it, space charged with something hidden, something patient. I swallowed, tasting the faint metallic tang of blood in my mouth, though I hadn't cut myself. The sensation was mine and not mine, as though the warehouse itself had exhaled, and I had inhaled its memory. I stepped inside, boots echoing against the concrete. Dust rose, tiny particles catching the last streaks of sun. The smell intensified, the mix of rust, mildew, and something faintly sweet. My fingers brushed against a support beam, the rough wood scraping my skin, and I felt the vibrations in the floor, subtle tremors that didn't belong to the building. I froze. Was it the wind, or had I stepped too close to something else? Something alive, I couldn't tell. The warehouse was empty, I told myself. It had to be empty. A shadow flickered along the far wall. I turned sharply, expecting someone, anyone, but saw only the outlines of crates and shelving. The movement had been quick, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. I realized my eyes had been following it without conscious thought. My pulse quickened. The space felt alive, as if it had shifted while I wasn't looking, rearranging itself subtly. Something about the ceiling beams, the old pulley system, the stacked containers, none of it should have moved. And yet, the sense of observation pressed down on me. I moved cautiously toward the center of the warehouse, letting my eyes adjust to the dim. Dust motes floated in beams of dying sunlight, twisting like small, slow dancers. The metallic smell deepened, and now a faint warmth touched the back of my neck, the kind that makes your skin prickle. I stopped again, every sense straining. Something had shifted behind me, a sound, subtle, almost a sigh. I spun, but the space behind me was empty. The echo, however, lingered in my ears, insistent, patient. I reached the far corner near a stack of pallets and noticed scratches along the concrete floor. Not fresh, but recent enough to suggest motion, movement, someone or something passing this way. My fingers hovered over them, tracing the marks lightly. They were shallow, uneven, as though hurried or careless, but intentional. My mind raced. Who had been here? Why hadn't I noticed it before? Every corner, every shadow, every beam seemed to hold a story I couldn't read. I felt exposed, like the building itself was aware of me. A breeze stirred a stack of papers, sending a single sheet fluttering toward me. I caught it, hands shaking slightly. It was blank, yet felt weighty, charged with something I couldn't name. I could hear faint whispers in the back of my mind, words just beyond comprehension. I shook my head, pressing the paper to my chest. The warehouse was quiet now, or as quiet as it could be, but the tension clung to me like a second skin. My breath was shallow, my thoughts raced. The evening had shifted, subtly but irreversibly, and I felt as though I had stepped into a place that existed partially outside time. I moved toward the exit, glancing over my shoulder. The warehouse seemed to breathe around me. Shadows pooled differently, angles sharpened, lines that should have been straight twisted slightly. Every step I took echoed, and yet the echoes didn't quite match my movement. I realized with a creeping sense of dread that the warehouse remembered me. It had absorbed my presence, my attention, and now it responded. Not with malice, not with threat, but with awareness. And that awareness was patient, waiting. Outside, the evening deepened. The lot beyond the gates lay in shadows, shapes blending into the darkness. I glanced at the windows along the warehouse's side. One pane reflected a shadow that wasn't mine. I froze. The reflection lingered, shifting slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure crouched low, observing me. My heart pounded. I wanted to look away, to dismiss it, but I couldn't. There was a tension there, something unspoken, a promise of knowledge that I wasn't meant to possess. I took a slow step toward the car parked at the edge of the lot. Gravel crunched under my boots. Each sound seemed to vibrate differently, as if the ground itself listened. I could feel the weight of the warehouse pressing outward, a subtle force that made the air denser, the shadows darker. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting movement, but the lot remained empty. And yet I knew better. Presence doesn't need form. Observation doesn't require a body. The car door felt cold under my hands. I sank into the seat, exhaling shakily. I wanted to convince myself it was over, that the warehouse had only played tricks with light and memory. But as I looked out the windshield, the building loomed, dark and silent. It didn't just sit there. It waited. It remembered. And somewhere inside, or perhaps everywhere around it, the subtle shift persisted. I had arrived in the evening, but I would leave carrying the weight of its observation. As I drove away, the setting sun disappeared behind the horizon and the lot melted into darkness. Yet even in the rearview mirror, I could feel the pulse of the warehouse. It wasn't just a building. Not really. It was a living memory, an aware space, a patient observer. And I knew I had changed simply by returning. Evening arrival had not been casual, not harmless. I had stepped into a place that had noticed me, and that notice would linger, echoing in my thoughts, in my reflections, in every shadow I passed. The drive home was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling of weight at my back. Every glance toward the rearview mirror revealed nothing, yet I could sense the subtle pull of awareness behind me. The warehouse, the lot, the shadows, they existed differently now. They carried something with them, something patient, and I had walked straight into it. I parked the car, lights cutting across the darkened street, but even inside my home I felt it. Not watching exactly, but present. Waiting. Patient. Evening had arrived, and with it, a realization. Returning was never neutral. The warehouse remembered me. It would remember me. And somewhere in that shifting, breathing space, something else waited to be seen, to be understood. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe, trying to shake the weight. Outside, the wind stirred faintly, carrying echoes of rust, of dust, of subtle shifts I couldn't define. The evening had ended, but the sense of being observed, of being accounted for, remained. And I knew I would return. The deeper I went, the darker it became, though the warehouse wasn't exactly unlit. The weak orange glow from the high windows barely touched the far corners, letting shadows spill and stretch like ink across the concrete. I noticed it the moment I stepped past the first support beam. The corners seemed longer than they should be, the space bending subtly, almost unwillingly. My eyes strained, trying to measure distance, but the walls refused to obey. Something was off, and I knew it before I could even name it. A sound, a scrape, so light I almost missed it, echoed from the left corner. I froze. The warehouse had held its breath with me, waiting, listening. I tilted my head, listening harder. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. And yet a sense of presence pressed against the back of my mind. Something was there, just out of sight, quiet, patient, watching. I stepped forward cautiously, letting my hands brush the edges of pallets and crates. Every texture felt amplified. The rough wood, the cold metal of shelving, the sharp edges of broken glass scattered across the floor. Dust rose with each step, tiny motes drifting in the dim light. I caught a faint metallic scent again, but this time it was sharper, more immediate, as if something had passed recently. My chest tightened. Who or what had been here before me, and why had I not heard it? I moved toward a dark corner near a row of stacked containers. The shadows pooled there, deeper than they should be, swallowing the edges of my vision. I felt the space shift subtly, as if the warehouse itself had leaned in. My eyes played tricks. Every time I blinked, the corner seemed closer, stretching further, the darkness curling toward me. I took a step back, heart thudding. I had to remind myself I was alone. Alone, alone, alone. But the instinct behind my words whispered something different, a quiet insistence I couldn't ignore. There it was again, a movement, faint, almost imperceptible, like the shuffle of fabric against concrete. I spun, searching, but saw nothing. My pulse raced. I ran my fingers along the cold metal of a support beam, grounding myself, and for a moment thought I could hear the faint echo of footsteps trailing mine, slower, cautious, deliberate. I stopped. Silence. My own breathing filled the empty space, too loud, too rhythmic. I crept toward another corner, the one where broken pallets leaned against the wall. Something felt wrong about this spot. The shadows pooled unnaturally, angles bending slightly, lines that should have been straight twisted subtly. I knelt, inspecting the floor. The concrete was scuffed, tiny scratches etched into it, patterns I didn't recognize, not from wear but from intention. Someone or something had moved here recently. I couldn't see it, but I could feel the energy, a subtle charge vibrating just beneath the surface. A sudden chill brushed my neck. I froze, muscles taut. The temperature in this corner had dropped noticeably, though the air outside the shadowed spaces remained warm from the day. I exhaled slowly, trying to rationalize it, to convince myself it was just a draft or the failing light. But instinct screamed otherwise. I wasn't alone in this darkness. Something followed, something patient, not rushing, not careless. It waited, measuring me. I stood, taking slow steps back to the main aisle, glancing over my shoulder. The shadows seemed to move with me, stretching and curling in impossible ways. I tried to focus, to track the shapes, but they refused to hold still. The longer I looked, the more distorted everything became. The lines of the floor, the edges of crates, the high beams above. My mind started to reel, trying to make sense of space that refused sense. Then a sound, a whisper, faint, almost carried on the air, unintelligible, teasing the edge of comprehension. I spun, but the corner remained empty. My pulse spiked. Was it memory playing tricks? Was it the building itself echoing my own thoughts back at me? I stepped cautiously closer, trying to pierce the shadows with my eyes. The faintest shape moved again, a blur at the edge of vision, gone the moment I tried to focus on it. I pressed a hand against a crate, letting my back lean lightly against it. The warehouse felt alive here, breathing, shifting subtly. The shadows pressed closer, stretching further than they should. I realized my fear wasn't coming from the visible, but from the unseen, from corners that stretched into impossibility, from the sense of being measured, followed. The more I tried to see, the more the space slipped away. A faint metallic scent again, stronger now, as though someone, had scraped metal across concrete somewhere just beyond sight. I turned slowly, taking deliberate steps, listening. A faint movement, closer now. Quick. A shadow flickered along the edge of a stack of boxes. I froze, straining, and caught the slightest hint of a shape. A tall, thin outline, human-like but wrong. When I blinked, it was gone, leaving nothing but the darkness and the echo of my own racing pulse. I realized I was holding my breath. The warehouse had drawn me in deeper than I intended, and now I felt like prey in my own investigation. Every corner I passed seemed to have shifted since my last glance. Angles were different, edges sharper, shadows longer. I tried to step carefully, moving along the perimeter, but each step brought the same sense of being watched, pursued. Not hurriedly, but deliberately, patiently. I approached a narrow corridor between two stacks of shelving. The shadows pooled at the far end, impossibly deep. I heard the faint scuff of something moving, deliberate, careful. I swallowed, feeling the metallic tang in my mouth again. I wanted to turn back, to leave, but curiosity held me fast. I crept forward, every sense straining, every muscle taut. Then it happened. A sound directly behind me, a shift in the air, a brush of movement that didn't belong to me. I spun, flashlight sweeping the space, but there was nothing. Yet my mind didn't let go. The warehouse whispered around me, shadows twisting, stretching, watching. The corners here weren't just dark. They were deliberate, spaces that existed only to hide something just beyond perception. I pressed against the wall of the corridor, feeling the rough concrete, grounding myself. My eyes darted from one corner to another. Movement again, subtle, barely perceptible, and I realized it mirrored mine. A shadow shifted as I moved, keeping distance, deliberate, patient. It wasn't fast, it wasn't chaotic, it was aware. I could feel intelligence in the darkness, shaping the space, hiding, watching. I tried to convince myself it was imagination, a trick of light and shadow, but instinct refused. Something had followed me here. Something had been patient, watching, waiting for me to arrive. I took a careful step forward, listening. The warehouse seemed to contract around me, corners stretching unnaturally, edges sharp, shadows deepening. The sense of being pursued grew, subtle but insistent, and I realized the building wasn't empty. Not truly. I reached the far corner of the corridor, peering into the darkness. My flashlight caught nothing, yet I could feel the presence shift again, just beyond perception. The air was heavier here, charged. I swallowed, fingers trembling slightly. The shadows moved with me, reacting, waiting. I had entered this space intentionally, seeking something I couldn't name. And now the corners themselves seemed to conspire, elongating, bending, hiding the unseen. A faint sound, high and thin, like scraping metal or fingernails on concrete, echoed somewhere far back. I spun, scanning the space, but again, nothing visible. My chest tightened. I realized the corners weren't just hiding something. They were shaping the space, controlling perception, holding secrets just out of reach. And whatever lurked in the darkness wasn't careless. It was deliberate. I tried to take a step back, but the shadows shifted in tandem, stretching, elongating, creating angles I didn't understand. The warehouse wasn't just a building. It was alive in a subtle, patient way. Every corner was a trap, every shadow a watcher. I could sense it following, measuring, not rushing, not striking, but counting, nodding, shaping my path. I pressed my hand against a crate, grounding myself, and tried to steady my breathing. The faint whispers returned, almost inaudible, teasing comprehension, but always just out of reach. I realized I was holding my breath again, heart hammering. Every corner, every stretch of darkness seemed to pulse with attention, a deliberate awareness I couldn't name. The further I moved, the more I realized the warehouse itself was orchestrating the space. Corners stretched, shadows shifted, reflections wavered. I wasn't walking alone. The presence followed, patient, careful, invisible, yet undeniably there. I could feel it, shaping the angles, holding the darkness just beyond perception, letting me see just enough to feel it was there. I paused in the center of the main aisle, listening. Nothing. And yet the tension was unbearable, a low hum in the air, pressing against my skin, tugging at the back of my mind. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift as I moved my head. Something was following, always just beyond sight, patient, careful. And I knew I would not see it clearly, not yet. The warehouse would not give up its secret so easily. I backed toward the exit, trying to ignore the unnatural stretch of corners, the patient presence shaping the space behind me. Shadows twisted, moving subtly, corners deepened impossibly. My pulse raced, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had learned something, small but significant. The warehouse was alive, aware, patient, and I had felt it follow. Outside, the lot lay empty in fading light, but I could feel it. The unseen corners, the deliberate shadows, the patient presence that had followed me. I hadn't seen it fully, but I had felt its awareness, subtle and precise. It lingered in the spaces I had passed, patient, watching. I could not know it completely, but I would carry the knowledge with me. Even as I drove away, the warehouse remained in my thoughts. Every shadow, every corner, every stretch of darkness, unseen but alive, patient but aware. I had walked its aisles, followed its patterns, felt its presence. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that it would remember. I had seen the unseen corners, and they had seen me. The moment I stepped into the warehouse again, the air felt different, thicker, almost alive. My boots echoed on the concrete floor, a familiar sound, steady and solid. But then I heard it. Another set of steps behind me, perfectly timed. Every scrape, every soft thud mirrored mine exactly. My pulse spiked. I stopped. They stopped. I moved. They moved. I told myself it was my imagination. Echoes happen in large spaces. Sound bends. The warehouse was big. But even as I said it, the logic didn't calm me. The mimicry was too precise, too deliberate. The steps didn't just follow, they matched, down to the slight limp I sometimes get when my foot drags. That was impossible. I paused in the center of a wide aisle. My flashlight caught the edges of stacked pallets, metal shelving and shadows pooling in every corner. And yet, something unseen moved with me. I could feel the rhythm in my chest, sinking to the echoes. My own heartbeat felt like a drumbeat amplified, carrying fear into the air. I tried walking faster, testing it, step after step. Tap after tap, the echoes kept pace, exactly matching my movements. I stopped abruptly. Silence, but not silence. A low vibration hummed in the air, subtle, almost imperceptible. My skin prickled. I could feel it in my bones, that quiet insistence that I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, sweeping the flashlight across every corner, every crate, every shadowed stretch, but the warehouse appeared empty. I whispered to myself, forcing rationality to surface. "It's just echoes," I said, though my voice sounded thin, too high, not quite my own. The words didn't comfort me. The steps began again, soft and deliberate, matching my breathing now, rising and falling in perfect cadence. I swallowed dry, trying to steady my hand that gripped the flashlight too tightly. I moved down a narrow aisle, deliberately shifting direction. The steps responded immediately, mimicking me perfectly around corners between shelving past broken pallets. I tried to lose them, darting left, right, weaving, but the rhythm followed. It didn't rush. It didn't falter. It simply existed, a perfect shadow of my own motion, patient and precise. I pressed my back against a crate, flashlight illuminating jagged edges and splintered wood. My pulse roared in my ears. What was following me? Was it human? Something else? I tried to convince myself there must be a rational explanation. Maybe someone had hidden in the shadows, copying me. But then I realized no one could have known my limp. No one could have mirrored the exact hesitation I had at every step. And yet, it happened. A faint metallic scent filled the air, subtle but sharp, like iron rubbed across concrete. I turned toward it, scanning the shelves, searching for a source. Nothing. The warehouse had swallowed it, hiding it among darkness and shadows. I moved again, slow, careful, trying to test if the steps would betray themselves. They didn't. They followed, perfectly. I felt my stomach tight. Reality wavered. I wasn't imagining the sound. I could feel it inside me, sinking to my motion, a heartbeat outside my own. I tried stepping in a random pattern, dragging one foot, then the other. The echoes adjusted, matching my unpredictability exactly. My mind screamed at me, trying to find logic. There was none. There couldn't be. And yet, it happened. I stumbled slightly over a crate, cursing under my breath. The echo did too, a soft scrape mimicking the sound of my stumble. My throat tightened. I whispered, "Stop, just stop." But the steps persisted. Every inhale, every exhale, every movement, they mirrored me. And I began to doubt everything I had known about this place, about myself, about reality. The further I moved, the more distorted everything became. Shadows twisted unnaturally, corners stretching further than they should. Light bent along the edges of metal shelves. I blinked rapidly, trying to ground myself in what I could see, but the warehouse was changing. Every step I took, every sound I made, seemed to pull the environment around me into a subtle, impossible distortion. I stopped in front of a tall stack of crates, flashlight cutting a line through thick shadows. I could hear the steps pause as well, perfectly synced, matching the hesitation in my own chest. I leaned forward, peering into darkness, trying to catch a glimpse of something, anything that would explain this. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, but the rhythm never faltered. I whispered into the emptiness, voice trembling. "Who's there?" No reply. The steps moved closer when I inched forward, retreating when I backed away. The warehouse itself seemed alive, responsive, watching, breathing with me. I realized then this wasn't a person. It wasn't a ghost, not exactly. It was something far subtler, far more deliberate. It was mimicking awareness. I pressed my hand to a metal beam, grounding myself, trying to slow my panic. I tried counting my steps, measuring them, breaking the pattern, but the echoes remained precise. It wasn't just following, it was learning, adapting, calculating. The notion made my skin crawl. The warehouse wasn't empty. It was aware, and I had become part of its rhythm. I moved toward the far end, where the shadows pooled thicker, corners bending unnaturally. Each step I took was mirrored perfectly, but the darkness seemed to thicken with each echo. Shapes stretched and twisted, angles shifting subtly like the warehouse itself leaned in to observe. The metallic scent intensified, sharp and close, though nothing was visible. I knew I wasn't alone, not in the sense of company, but in the sense of an attentive, patient presence. I stopped in an open area, flashlight illuminating splintered wood, broken glass, and crates stacked haphazardly. I could hear the steps pause again, precisely timed to my hesitation. My pulse thundered. I leaned forward slightly, peering into shadows that deepened impossibly with each blink. Something or someone was learning me, measuring me, playing out each movement with eerie fidelity. I tried a sudden step, moving faster than before, then crouching, trying to break the rhythm. The echo followed, instant, perfect, matching every subtle nuance. Panic surged. I stumbled over a crate again, and the echo stumbled too. My own laughter broke out, harsh and short, disbelief in my voice. I whispered, "This isn't real, it can't be real." But deep down, I knew it was. Some part of me understood the warehouse itself had learned me, had mirrored me, had claimed me in its subtle, patient way. I pressed my back against a wall, chest heaving, trying to catch my breath. I could hear faint scraping sounds, moving with me even when I didn't step. Shadows shifted slightly with each motion, bending light, creating angles I hadn't noticed before. I felt eyes, unseen, unblinking, patient, tracking every subtle movement. I wanted to run, but where would I go? The warehouse was a maze, corners stretching further than they should, shadows pooling impossibly. I took a careful step toward a narrow aisle. The echo followed, precise, unwavering. I tried moving sideways, diagonally, changing speed, rhythm, weight, but it adapted. It matched me perfectly, like water following my motion. I realized with a cold certainty this wasn't human. This wasn't alive in any ordinary sense. It was awareness without form, calculation without body, a mirror of me in the dark. A faint metallic scent grew stronger. I could feel it in my mouth, in my lungs, sharp and tangible. It wasn't wind, it wasn't residue. It was deliberate, guiding, close. I tried to spin, shining the flashlight in all directions, but the shadows didn't reveal anything. The echo didn't stop. It didn't falter. My own footsteps had become the sound of something else, something waiting in perfect patience. I stumbled again, catching myself on a crate. The echo stumbled too. I pressed my hands to my face, trembling, whispering, "Stop, please stop." But it didn't, it couldn't. The rhythm had become independent of me. I had thought I controlled my motion, my rhythm, but now it felt like the echo controlled me, guiding, anticipating, learning. The warehouse was alive in a way I couldn't name. I forced myself to move toward the exit slowly, deliberately, trying to ignore the perfection of the echo behind me. The corners stretched longer, shadows pooling deeper, the metallic scent guiding me subtly, like breadcrumbs through impossible darkness. My pulse raced, each beat echoing in time with the steps that were no longer just behind me, but intertwined with me, inseparable. I reached the doorway to the lot outside. The dim evening light spilled through, offering safety, clarity, but I didn't step out immediately. The echoes had stopped at the threshold, perfect silence. My chest heaved, eyes darting across the empty space. The warehouse had let me leave, but I could feel its awareness still, lingering, patient, waiting. I realized I had survived, but I had not escaped. Not truly. Outside, I stepped onto cracked concrete, the warehouse looming behind me, silent, impossible. I tried to shake the sense of rhythm embedded in me, the perfection of the echo still pulsing in my mind. I had walked its corridors, mirrored its pattern, and it had mirrored me in turn. I wasn't safe, not really, not ever. The sun was fading. Shadows stretched across the lot, unnatural even in daylight. I could feel the echo still, somewhere, patient, precise, waiting for the next step I would take. I could never forget the way it had matched me, predicted me, mirrored me perfectly. I had left the warehouse physically, but its presence had left a mark deep inside me, a pulse that would never quite fade. And I knew I would return, not out of courage or curiosity or foolishness, but because the echo had become part of me. It had claimed my rhythm, mirrored my motion, and now it whispered in the spaces I could no longer control. The warehouse was patient, waiting, and so was I. I stepped out of the warehouse, and the evening air hit me like a wave I hadn't expected. Cool, dry, normal. Or at least it should have been normal. But the rhythm of the echoes still clung to my chest, every heartbeat seeming slightly off, like a faint drum I couldn't stop hearing. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of it, but the warehouse had left a mark. Its patient, perfect presence had rooted inside me. The lot was empty. Rusted fences, cracked asphalt, the occasional flicker of distant lights. I thought I was safe, thought leaving meant I could finally breathe. But then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, fleeting, like someone had just spoken behind a door. I froze. Nothing visible moved. The sound was distant, barely more than a shadow of a word. I strained to catch it. There it was again, another whisper, almost forming a sentence, but impossible to understand. My pulse spiked. The wind stirred, rattling a loose metal sheet on the fence, but the whispers didn't stop. They weren't carried by the wind. They weren't echoes. They were deliberate, subtle, insistent. I forced myself to move, step by step, toward my car, toward the idea of leaving. But each step carried a new sound, distant doors slamming somewhere in the darkness. Not in sequence, not in pattern, but precisely timed to unsettle. I stopped. The silence of the warehouse had been replaced by a new form of awareness, one that followed me beyond its walls. A shadow flickered across the far lot, too fast, too deliberate to be my imagination. I blinked and it vanished. The whispers rose slightly, not loud, just enough to curl around the edges of my thoughts. I could almost make out words, half sentences, questions without answers. My mind tried to rationalize. Maybe kids. Maybe wind and metal and my own imagination. But deep down, I knew that rationality was useless. I reached my car, keys trembling in my hand. The metallic scent was faint now, less sharp than inside the warehouse, but still there, a subtle reminder of what had waited for me. I looked back at the building. Windows dark, shadows pooling, corners bending subtly. The echo hadn't left. Its presence lingered in the air, silent but heavy. I had walked out physically, but not mentally, not spiritually, not emotionally. I slid into the driver's seat, shaking hands, fumbling with the keys. The engine turned over, a comforting sound, solid, reliable. But even as I put the car in gear, I could feel it. The whispering, the doors, the faint metallic scent, all threading together, following me as if the warehouse had reached through space itself to extend its awareness. I drove slowly, headlights cutting a path through the dark lot. Every shadow seemed alive, angles stretching, corners deepening. The whispers came again, almost coherent this time, phrases that I couldn't place, questions that brushed against memory. I tried to ignore them, tried to tell myself it was nothing. But the air inside the car felt heavier, thicker, a pressure I couldn't describe. I passed the nearest street lamp, its light harsh and unnatural after the darkness. For a moment, I imagined movement in the rearview mirror, a shape tall and lean standing just beyond the lot. I blinked. Nothing. But the feeling of being observed didn't leave. My pulse thundered. I was driving, yet part of me wanted to turn back, wanted to run into the darkness and confront the presence I couldn't name. Fear battled curiosity, but I couldn't let myself go back. Not yet. The whispers shifted. The words changed subtly, almost like they were responding to me, adjusting. A question formed in my mind. Was it aware of me, or was I imagining awareness? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed that there was something out there, patient and precise, waiting for me to notice. I pulled onto the main road, headlights cutting through scattered puddles and uneven asphalt. Streetlights flickered in the distance. And still, the faint sound of doors slamming echoed, not rhythmic, not patterned, but deliberate, almost communicating. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. My hands gripped the wheel as though I could squeeze control back into existence. I passed a group of abandoned buildings. The shadows seemed different here, longer, sharper, stretching beyond what was logical. I imagined movement inside them, faint silhouettes gliding past broken windows. Every step I had taken inside the warehouse, every mirrored echo, every motion now felt connected to this external space. I wondered if leaving truly mattered. A whisper rose again, closer now, almost directly behind me in the car, though no one was there. I turned slightly, checking the backseat. Empty. My own reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed, pale under the dashboard lights. I could hear my heartbeat in the stillness of the car. Even my blood felt loud. The warehouse's presence was embedded inside me, persistent, patient, impossible to ignore. I tried speaking aloud, hoping that human sound could break the tension. I'm leaving. I'm gone. My voice sounded strange in the cabin, too loud, too brittle. The whispers didn't cease. They rose, a layering of voices now, questions and half-statements, phrases brushing against my name. I could feel them in the air, in the shadows outside, in the silence itself. I realized something then. Silence wasn't emptiness. Silence was an answer, one I hadn't understood before. The warehouse had spoken in footsteps, in shadows, in presence. And now, in the distance, in whispers and doors and gaps between sounds, the silence carried meaning. It didn't want me to hear it fully. It wanted me to feel it, to sense it, to acknowledge that leaving didn't mean escape. I drove faster, though the echoes of metal and whispers and distant doors didn't lessen. Every building I passed seemed to react subtly, shadows stretching toward me, light bending around corners. I wanted to scream, wanted to shatter the invisible thread that still connected me to that space. But the thread remained, silent but undeniable. The metallic scent returned faintly, mingling with the night air. I exhaled sharply, realizing I hadn't noticed it until now, but it was everywhere, in the car, on my clothes, lingering in the air I breathed. A reminder that whatever had followed me had extended beyond walls, beyond doors, beyond echoes. It wasn't confined. It waited, patient, precise, observing without moving. I reached my apartment building, lights warm and inviting against the darkness outside. I parked, heart still hammering, body tense. I tried to convince myself it was over. The warehouse was behind me. I had escaped. But the whispers rose again, faint, curling around my thoughts like smoke. The distant sound of doors closing punctuated each whisper, deliberate and slow. The echo hadn't left me. It never would. I sat in the car, hands on the wheel, breathing deeply. The silence inside the apartment lobby seemed different, unnatural. I could feel it reaching, stretching across space, threading through the walls, whispering questions I couldn't answer. I knew then that leaving a physical space didn't remove its presence. Awareness isn't bound by walls or windows. It follows, patient and precise, like a shadow fused to thought itself. I climbed the stairs slowly, one step at a time, the metallic scent faint but persistent in the hallway. I reached my door, fumbling with the keys, heart racing, pulse echoing the pattern I had learned to fear. Inside, the apartment was still, ordinary, normal. And yet, the whispering lingered, threading through walls and air, reminding me that I had carried part of that place with me. I closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled. Silence. For a heartbeat, maybe two. And then from somewhere beyond the walls I heard it again, a soft whisper, faint, distant, a question without an answer. A door clicked somewhere far off, deliberate, echoing through the empty building. My pulse stuttered. I realized I wasn't alone, not in the sense I expected, but present, observed, measured. The apartment felt too small now, too quiet, too safe in name only. I tried to shake the lingering fear, tried to convince myself I had survived, that the warehouse was behind me. But the whispers continued, faint and impossible, threading through my thoughts, curling around my mind like smoke. They weren't forming full sentences, just fragments, questions, pauses. Silence had spoken, but only partially. I sank onto the couch, still gripping the edge, still listening. Every sense was alert. The faint metallic scent lingered, a ghost of what had been. The whispering in the distance carried the weight of patient observation. I realized that the warehouse had extended itself beyond its walls, beyond time, into me, threading presence into my awareness. And I would never know where it ended, or if it ever would. Night deepened outside. Shadows pooled inside my apartment, corners stretching further than they should. The silence held meaning. Subtle and deliberate, guiding thought without answering questions. I closed my eyes for a moment, but even then the whispering persisted, faint and insistent. I understood then that leaving never truly mattered. Silence holds answers, but the answers are patient. They wait. They shape perception. They linger. And I was left in its grip, aware of its presence, carrying it with me, a pulse beneath my own heartbeat, a shadow threaded into thought. I didn't know what the whispers wanted. I didn't know what the doors represented. I only knew that the warehouse, and whatever had followed me, had not finished. It never would. And in the silence that remained, I could feel it, patient, precise, observing, waiting. I would sleep eventually. I would breathe eventually. But the warehouse, the whispers, the echoes, they had left a mark too deep to erase. Silence had spoken, partially, cryptically, leaving me with one certainty. Leaving does not equal escape. And that certainty stretched through the night, persistent, patient, and unresolved.